The working day in the company was over. Alex Smith, having switched off the computer, went down to the underground guarded garage of his own firm. There he was waiting for a new premium class car, which the young businessman had bought only a month ago. Great car, Alex thought to himself as he drove out of the garage into the street. On such a car, one is not ashamed to come to a meeting with foreign partners. This car still inspires respect. Alex recently turned 30, and he celebrated his anniversary with an incredible scale. He rented the most expensive restaurant in the city for the evening and invited a lot of guests. The fun lasted until the morning, so that this day he himself and his mates will remember for a long time. Smith drove quickly to the motorway. There was almost no traffic at that time. The businessman easily reached his luxurious cottage in about 15 to 20 minutes. On the threshold of the house, he was already met by Trinity, his fiancée. "Are you punctual as always, my love?" The girl kissed the groom on the cheek. "And I've just baked your favorite spinach pies. Come in, wash your hands, and come to the table." Alex lightly embraced Trinity and smiled politely. They were to be married in just a month, so the bride spent all her free time supervising the organization of all wedding processes, from the choice of location for the photo shoot to the color of napkins and balloons. The wedding promised to be very lush and loud. The Smith family even gave a note about this event in the press, say, "Come all who know the bride or groom, or just want to express their respect and wish the couple all the best in their new life together." Alex's fate could be called perfect, if not for one, but in fact, he did not really want to go to such a responsible step. He was pushed by his own parents, who saw Trinity as a perfect match for their son. "Alex, sweetheart, you don't worry," his mother, Mrs. Vanessa, told him. "Trinity is a very good girl. Thanks to her parents, our position in the market will only get even stronger. You know, the Brown family is one of the most influential in printing and design. They will give us access to their own facilities, and that will be very good for our company." "Yes, son, listen to what your mother says," Mr. Carl agreed with her with a laugh. "Father, believe me, it is not good for men to think in such a matter. A marriage of convenience is the sure way to a happy married life. Mrs. Vanessa and I know that." Mr. Carl gave him a meaning smile and a wink, but his wife only grinned briefly. She knew perfectly well that if she did not marry the stroppy son now, and with the benefit of the family business, it would only get worse. And Alex, who was always by nature a proud and willful boy, nevertheless accepted his parents' choice. He understood, at his age, many of the world-famous businessmen had already got families and children. He had to think first of all about the continuation of the family, that the presence of a wife and heirs will help him to strengthen his own position in the business environment. And in this respect, Trinity turned out to be quite an acceptable option. She was beautiful, sweet, educated. In addition, his parents knew the Browns for a long time, and Trinity, in truth, was the first candidate for the role of his future wife. The girl herself was not against such a marriage at all. She liked Alex for a long time. She really wanted to marry him. Alex hoped that in time their sympathy would probably grow into something more, and if they would not become passionate lovers, they would at least respect each other. That would be enough for the young businessman. The Smith family owned a large furniture and door hardware business. The business was profitable. The spouses had been engaged in it for many years. But now the parents felt it was time to put the management of the company in the hands of their only son, so that he could bring a fresh creative eye and the latest trends in the field to their empire. Alex, who up to this point had mostly had only a superficial acquaintance with his family's business, found himself somewhat shocked at the scale of the business he was now to manage. Previously, most of his life had been spent partying with friends and courting beautiful girls. But now everything has changed, and the young man had to grow up sharply, as his parents, already being at a rather respectable age, dreamed of finally having a holiday themselves, passing their child into the safe hands of their son. And so the young businessman was preparing for the wedding, at the same time continuing to manage the business, when a strange event happened in his life. Once a fortnight before the celebration, Alex received a very unusual letter by mail. The thing was, the letter turned out to be stamped with the stamp of a regional prison. What the hell is that? He wondered to himself and locked himself in the bathroom so he could print it out and read it quietly away from prying eyes. In the letter, a certain Marion was informing Alex that he had 3 wonderful sons. 3. Not only that, but Marion had given birth to them in the colony. So now, unless he intended to participate in any way in their lives and upbringing, she was going to sue him for child support. To say that Alex was shocked when he read the letters to say nothing. "What the hell is this?" he muttered under his breath. "What children? What is this woman even writing about?" He ran his hand over his face, as if he wanted to wipe away any trace of worry and anxiety. "Okay, the most important thing now is that Trinity doesn't find out about this stupidity," Alex said out loud to himself. "It's probably some kind of evil prank. A joke to ruin the mood of me and my fiancée before the wedding." Deciding so, the young man tore the letter into 4 pieces and, stuffing it deeper into his pocket, walked out of the bathroom. "Honey, are you all right?" Trinity inquired in a concerned tone. "I saw you got some mail. I hope it's nothing bad." Alex made a sort of smile on his face, but it didn't work very well. Trinity immediately realized something was wrong with her fiancé. No, what is it, my love?" the man quickly muttered. "It's all right, just a routine business mailing. Nothing serious." "And don't they send that sort of thing by email?" the bride asked doubtfully. Alex tried to guffaw, saying that his partners were the ones who stayed true to the old traditions and liked to send paper letters. Only Trinity didn't really believe it. "What? Does he take me for a fool or what?" The girl thought to herself. "I didn't spend 5 years in Canada studying psychology to be fooled like this." "I'm actually very hungry," the groom hastened to change the subject. "And I thought you said you had something extremely delicious tonight. Can I taste it?" And Alex smiled at her again, but it came out extremely fake. "Sure, honey," she pretended to believe his excuses. "The roast is waiting for you in the kitchen." All evening, Trinity behaved like a model wife. But as soon as they went to bed, she jumped into the kitchen on the pretext of thirst and immediately rushed to the rubbish bin, where, as she noticed, Alex had thrown the remains of the letter, pulling out all 4 halves. The girl folded them and read with horror about some Marion and her children. The businessman's fiancée was far from stupid, and that's why she realized at once that it smelled of treason. Jealousy gripped Trinity's heart, and she hardly waited until morning to tell her fiancé everything that had accumulated in her soul over the past night. "Why don't you tell me about your mistress Marion?" she asked angrily, looking at Alex. He was just pouring coffee into his cup when he saw his disgruntled fiancé in the kitchen doorway. Trinity folded her arms across her chest and looked determined to get the truth out of her fiancé. "What mistress?" He didn't understand at first. "You must be confused about something, sweetheart." Then Alex remembered the letter and immediately turned pale. Here, his fiancée nodded at him. "Not only did you decide to have some woman on the side, but she also managed to have a baby in prison. Alex, do you realize what a shame this is for me?" Trinity's eyes were burning wildly. But Alex was just confused, not knowing what to say to the accusation. He had absolutely no idea who this Marion was, nor did he know why she had written to this particular address. Surely it must be some mistake, the rich man tried to reassure her. There's little to know what those poor sissies have in mind. Maybe she made it all up in the first place, and there are no children there at all. You'd better be right, the bride wagged her finger at him. Because if I find out you're lying to me, and even on the eve of the wedding, I'm going to be very, very disappointed in you, Alex. Trinity left the kitchen, throwing her long red hair over her shoulder irritably, emphasizing her displeasure with the intonation of her fiance's name. No matter how rich her fiancé was, she hadn't found herself on the streets either, and she wouldn't tolerate any children in their home. Alex only exhaled a sigh of relief then, feeling the storm had passed. The man quietly finished his coffee and got ready for work. He didn't know who had sent him that damned letter, and to be honest, he didn't want to find out. The businessman hoped that the situation would resolve itself like a bad dream. However, he was very much mistaken. About a week after the incident, someone rang the bell at the gate of Alex and his fiancée's house. Alex was going to go to the atelier for a fitting that day, to check how his wedding suit would fit him. When he opened the gate, to his amazement, he saw a young, attractive woman in fancy clothes on the threshold. She was holding on to the handle of a spacious pram containing 3 adorable babies. The stunned businessman could only ask in a weak voice, "Who are you? What do you want?" The woman looked at him sullenly, then quietly interjected, "Are you the one asking me who I am? Do you even have a conscience, William?" Alex shook his head negatively. "You must be mistaken. I'm not William. My name is Alex Smith, and I'm sorry I don't know you at all." The eyebrows on the woman's face rose upwards in surprise. "Ah, that's it. He doesn't know. So how to fill my head with romantic nonsense so everything is fine, but how to bear responsibility, to bring up children so he doesn't know me. You've got yourself a good job, I see." "Calm down, please," Alex asked her. "My fiancée is at home. She can hear you." "That's fine. Let her hear you." The guest shouted back as loudly as possible. "What did you think? Change your name so I won't find you. The whole capital is buzzing about your wedding with that woman. I'm not stupid either. I saw an article in the newspaper about your fiancé. You found yourself a rich girl, William, beautiful as a picture." "What's the matter?" Trinity came up to them at that moment. She had already heard the loud cries in the courtyard and had therefore hurried to her fiancé. The visitor looked at the bride with undisguised hatred. "And good luck to you too, beautiful," she said in a mocking tone, and bowed jokingly to Trinity. "But here, you see, we are having a small talk with your fiancé. I have borne him children, these very ones." Marion nodded at the triplets, "and he won't recognize me. He's hiding from me. Even changed his name. He's so afraid." Trinity stared at Alex in shock, but he felt the same way. He was definitely seeing the woman standing in front of him for the first time in his life. "Is it true what she says?" his fiancée asked him with tears in her eyes. No, I swear to you." The businessman shook his head. "I don't know her at all, and I don't understand what's going on here. It's some kind of circus." It was here that the young man finally realized who was in front of him. "Wait, so you're Marion? You're the one who wrote the other day?" The woman grinned briefly and wickedly. "Wow, you deign to remember my name." "Yes, I am Marion, and these are your children, you wretched scoundrel. I did 8 months in prison, pregnant by you, by the way. That's when our children were born. I was released on parole. Thank God I didn't have a very heavy sentence. So they had mercy on a single mother with many children." "My God, what a horror," was all Trinity could exclaim. Spurred on by anger and resentment, she asked her fiancé, "And you're still going to claim you knew nothing about her? How could you?" It seemed to Alex that his head was about to explode from this absurdity. There were groundless accusations coming at him from both sides. It was clear that this Marion thought he was the father of her children. But that certainly could never be. "Look here, why don't we go into the house? I'll get the housekeeper to make you some hot tea, and I'm sure we can sort it all out. Just let's stop shouting in the middle of the street." Be that as it may, Alex's upbringing prevented him from chasing this poor woman off the doorstep. He was determined to sort things out, and he felt sorry for her children, who were certainly not to blame. Marion hesitated, but then agreed and went into the house. The triplets began to worry. The mother realized they were hungry. The housekeeper took the woman to a separate room where she could feed the children in peace, while she brewed aromatic herbal tea for the guests. "One thing I don't understand, Alex. When did you have time to go left?" Trinity hissed angrily to the businessman before anyone could hear. "Seems like you've been at work all day, tired, and you've only spent the night with me. I can't believe you could flatter that redneck." Alex looked at her with a grim look. "I'm telling you for the 100th time, honey, I didn't cheat on you. This is a mistake, but I'm going to try to find out why that woman thinks that." The bride looked at him skeptically. "Do you think I'm really going to believe your words after all this?" Alex had no intention of continuing this argument, especially since Marion had already come out to join them in the kitchen. As she sat at the table, the businessman tried to ask her as correctly as possible. "Marion, explain why you are sure that I am the father of your children." The mother of many children looked at him as if she were explaining the simplest truths to an unintelligent child. Who else would it be? Or don't you remember how you first charmed me and had an affair with me and then brazenly set me up? Alex looked at his guest with genuine sympathy. Whatever had happened to this woman, she had clearly been through something terrible. I mean, we worked at that firm together. Remember, I was an accountant. And you made me sign that unfortunate document that put me on the outside. I went to jail for it. And just before the trial, I found out I was expecting your baby. The doctors told me later that I was having triplets, Marion said, barely holding back her tears. She was very hurt. Hurt that the man she loved so sincerely had betrayed her. And now she didn't even want to admit that he was wrong. Alex looked at Marion carefully and then asked, "Can you tell me the exact name of the company where you worked and the time period you held the position of accountant there?" She nodded and gave all the information she was interested in. Alex nodded then and called the housekeeper over to him. "Mrs. Megan will show you to a room where you can stay with the children. Please try to calm down and rest. In the meantime, I will try to find out what happened to you and your real fiancé." Marion only looked at him in amazement. She hadn't expected Alex to be so involved with her. For the first time, the woman began to wonder if it was really her William in front of her. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "Whoever you are, thank you for not leaving me and my children in distress." As the housekeeper took Marion to the first floor, a furious Trinity burst into the kitchen. "What, are you really determined to keep that girl in our house? You're out of your mind." Alex only raised his hand warningly in response. "Hold the heat, honey. I need to find out why it was Marion who mistook me for the father of her children. The story she told is very much true. I just checked on the internet, and the company she was talking about does exist. It's in a neighboring town in the region. I'll go there tomorrow and find out." Trinity wanted to scandalize her fiancé, but thought better of it. There's no telling what's going on. What if there really is some kind of misunderstanding? Then it would appear that she ruined her and Alex's happiness with her own hands. She wanted too much to get married, and had put too much effort into making the upcoming ceremony perfect. And for that matter, she could put up with that boorish Marion and her children for a couple of days. The next morning, the businessman hit the road, arriving in a neighboring town and finding the office, presumably the one he worked in. Alex, a little worried, walked through the door. "Oh, Mr. William," exclaimed the guard cheerfully at the sight of him. "It's been a long time since you visited us. We've lost track of you. How are you? How is your health?" "What about my health?" Alex didn't understand. "But how come?" The security guard lowered his eyes in embarrassment. "You went straight to sick leave after that incident. Only you didn't show up at our place again, so we thought you were seriously ill." The young businessman realized that if he wanted to find out the truth, he would have to play along with the local staff. "Thanks, I'm fine now," he replied evasively. "But can you remind me what floor our office is on? I'm not very good at orientating myself in space after my illness." The guard looked at him in surprise for a moment, but then he said, "It's still the same. We are based on the 6th floor. Nothing has changed in the meantime." Alex thanked him and then proceeded to the indicated floor. There he really found a large open-type office. The mass of employees sat side by side, separated only by plastic partitions, which created a very faint illusion of a separate space. Several people from the general hive immediately caught sight of him and began to wave vigorously at Alex. "Mr. William, you're finally back. How we've missed you," a pretty blonde woman said, embarrassed, as she approached the businessman. "William, darling, isn't it a miracle? Where have you been all this time? Where have you disappeared to?" Some overweight man in glasses asked him, while shaking the businessman desperately by the arm. "Yes, I have. As a matter of fact, look, why do you all call me William?" The people around him immediately fell silent and began to look amongst themselves in surprise. Finally, the blonde replied, "Because you, Mr. William Willis, are our beloved head of sales. Don't you remember anything?" Alex shook his head in surprise. Then the man in glasses continued, "You disappeared from the office a few months ago, just before our head accountant, Marion Johnson's, went to jail. She'd forged some kind of document and stole a few million from the company. And after that, you got sick and disappeared. Alex understood absolutely nothing. How could this be possible if he had been leading his normal life all this time? The only explanation could be that he had a twin brother or a very similar twin. But the latter was most unlikely. Did he really have a twin he knew nothing about? Thanking the staff and getting rid of their persistent curiosity, Alex left the office and went straight to his parents' mansion. He hoped that this conversation would bring him closer to solving the mystery, except that his father and mother were as shocked as he was. "What are you, son? What twin brothers?" Mrs. Vanessa said, perplexed. "You are our only, most favorite child." "Maybe you just misunderstood something," suggested the father. "Sometimes it happens. People are so much alike to each other that under certain circumstances they can be confused. You know, like actors' doppelgangers that they write about in the papers all the time. I think that's exactly your case." A frustrated Alex drove back home. He seemed to realize that if his parents didn't know anything about his hypothetical brother, then therefore he simply didn't exist. However, the businessman's intuition was telling him something different. The man felt that there were too many ambiguities in this story, and most likely his double did not just disappear without a trace. Perhaps something bad had happened to him, and maybe even he needed help. Alex hired a couple of reliable private detectives and started searching. He looked for his doppelganger everywhere he could, in remote villages, hospitals. He even checked all the homeless shelters in the area, but no one had heard of any Mr. William Willis. Desperate, Alex decided to check the nearest morgues, but even there he was rejected. "At least now it's clear that he's either alive or really missing," Alex said aloud to himself as he returned from another village where he had been canvassing with one of the detectives. The question invariably plagued him. Where has William, who looks so much like him, gone? It seemed to the young businessman that he was overlooking something, some simple detail that would help him find the clue. Just what that detail was, Alex couldn't figure out yet. Then his attention was attracted by a homeless man who was sitting right by the roadside, begging for alms. The man was holding an old cap with his outstretched hand. Apparently, he was hoping that one of the drivers would stop and help him. But that wasn't what caught Alex's attention. The eyes. The beggar's eyes were exactly the same color and had the same expression as his own. In moments of sadness or longing, Alex looked at himself as if in a mirror, looking at this homeless man. In addition, their hair was almost the same color, except that the beggar's was a little lighter because of the sunburn. "Mate," Alex whistled to him, "can I talk to you for a minute?" The beggar looked at the businessman in stunned. Understandably, Alex's face seemed very familiar to him. After all, it was his own face. The homeless man crossed himself and wanted to run away, but the young businessman managed to stop him. "Oh wait, don't be afraid. I won't hurt you," Alex said out of breath when he finally managed to catch up with the beggar. "Why should I?" the man asked him rudely. "I know a lot of people on the motorway who can stand up for me." "You misunderstood me," Alex interjected with a smile. "What sacrifice? I'm not a cultist or a demon, and I'm not looking for people for organs either. I'm just a man who realized he'd found his own brother." Although William's face was overgrown with a thick beard and his long hair was badly tangled, it was undoubtedly him. Alex persuaded the poor man to get into the car, promising to take him to a good cafe so he could have a full meal. Alex explained the whole situation to him and asked him what had happened to him then. "I'd love to help you," William answered him with a sigh, "but I don't remember anything. Since I came to my senses on the street almost a year ago, that's how I've been living. All right, the town's homeless guys kept me warm. Otherwise, it would have been a real drag." Then Alex pulled a photograph and money out of his jacket pocket. She was pictured with her children. He had specifically asked her to take the picture so that he would have something to show William when he found him. Taking the picture, Alex's twin brother felt like he'd been electrocuted. Memories came back to him one by one, as if someone had unlocked his memory. Mother of God, the beggar could only squeeze out Marion. The man remembered everything. Large tears immediately rolled from his eyes. The feelings swept over him headlong. William was confused and lost in thought every time he tried to tell Alex about the last days of his former life. "I did work at that firm, after all, and we had an affair," William explained, "but I would never betray her." The beggar sighed heavily. "Marion and I genuinely loved each other. I wanted to propose to her. I'd even picked out a ring already. It was Deputy Director Peterson who forced me to make that unfortunate money transfer. If I'd known I was signing my love's death warrant with my own hands, I'd have torn him to shreds. But I didn't know anything. The deputy told me he had a lucrative contract with the foreigners. That's where the deal needs to be handled carefully, sort of like paying less tax." "If that's true, why did you disappear? Why didn't you inquire about the fate of your fiancée?" Alex asked him. "Yes, because I didn't have time," William replied grimly. "I was coming home from work very late that day. The same Peterson asked me to stay late. Had to double-check some figures on the material purchase reports." The man rubbed his forehead slowly, as if recalling the events of that fateful evening. "Anyway, by the time I got outside, it was already very dark, you know. The last thing I remember is walking up to my driveway, and then darkness. I lost my memory almost completely. I couldn't even remember my name. I remember the U in my name," William shrugged. "Come to think of it, I turned out to have 3 kids before I was born. Thank you for taking care of my Marion. I swear I would never hurt her intentionally. It creeps me out when I think about the long 8 months she had to spend in that hell in the colony." Alex nodded. He realized that his brother had probably been attacked with the intent to kill him. This Peterson had apparently embezzled several million and then cleverly disposed of all the unwitting participants in the scam. Marion, as an accountant, was facing trial and jail time, and William was tried to be physically disposed of. Fortunately, they were unsuccessful. "What's this coming out of?" William suddenly asked him. "You're kind of like my twin brother. It can't be that we're that much alike." "I don't know how it happened myself," Alex replied thoughtfully, "but you and I will find out. In the meantime, I think we'd better go to the police and tell them everything. We've got to get this Peterson guy before he ruins someone else's life." William liked the idea, and they went to the nearest police station, where they told everything as it happened. The law enforcement officers, of course, were quite surprised by their story, but still detained the deputy to verify the information. Under pressure, Peterson quickly confessed and gave a confession, so he was soon to receive a fair trial and a big prison sentence. Meanwhile, Alex brought William to his parents' house, where he secretly showed him his father and mother. However, as soon as the homeless man took one look at these well-groomed, beautifully dressed elderly people, his face turned dead pale. "What is it?" Alex asked him worriedly. "It's like you've seen a ghost." "Not exactly, but almost," his brother answered him evasively. And then he turned to Alex, and he noticed the look of utter bewilderment on his face. "Alex, I know these people," he said. "What?" the businessman interjected in amazement. "I tell you exactly. They're my distant relatives, old-timers. They've looked after and supported me since I was a boy. That said, I've never been a guest of theirs." Alex felt his hands go cold with shock. This was something he certainly hadn't expected from his relatives. "Are you sure you're not mistaken?" Alex clarified, "My last name is Smith, but I've never heard of you. To be honest, I didn't know I had such a grandnephew at all, and an exact replica." Alex grinned bitterly. He understood perfectly well now that his parents simply deceived him, lied straight to his face, not being ashamed of it. "I was always a distant relative to them." William sighed sadly. "But can it be that distant relatives like you and I are so much alike?" Alex looked angrily at his own father and mother. "Well, let's go up to them and ask them about it in person." William got a little worried as he watched Alex resolutely get out of the car and slam the driver's door behind him with force. But there was nothing to do. William got out of his padded seat as well. When his parents spotted Alex, they waved happily at him at first. Mrs. Vanessa was just tending the roses in their small garden at that moment. But when she saw William beside her son, the smile slowly disappeared from her face, giving way to confusion and fear. "Well, hello, Mum," Alex began coldly. Approaching her, "Look who I met in town." A surprisingly similar person to me, isn't he? Son, wait, what's going on? Mr. Carl hurried over to them. Seeing William, he gave an involuntary shudder. Hello to you too, Dad, echoed the young businessman just as sternly. Mom and I were just talking about how you forgot to tell me about our distant relative, William. And he, what a coincidence, resembles me like a twin, although you claimed I had no brothers, and certainly no twins. Meanwhile, you've been helping William all these years. The parents didn't know what to say to this to their son. Finally, as the awkward pause dragged on, Alex asked, Aren't there too many lies in our family? Parents, let's go inside. It's time for you to tell William and me the whole truth. Son, Mrs. Vanessa sobbed, forgive us if you can. You were never meant to know about this. William, struck by the full poignancy of the situation, didn't know what to say. And was it even worth it? As they made their way inside the mansion and settled into the spacious living room, the first to begin the difficult story was the brothers' father, Mr. Carl. I don't even know where to begin, boys, he said slowly. I guess with the fact that you're not our own sons. How? Queried Alex dumbfoundedly. Alas, but it's true, his father answered him. This all happened a very long time ago. You weren't even a year old then. Mrs. Vanessa and I worked as ordinary merchandisers in the same shop in those days. There was no such thing as wealth. We could barely get by, and we were glad we did. It was very hard on us. Alex, Mrs. Vanessa continued, but we tried to be honest and decent people and never did anything illegal. Mr. Carl looked at his spouse strangely at these words, but said aloud, Anyway, when we saw that burning car on the road and you inside, Mrs. Vanessa and I had no time to think. We pulled you out of the fire a few moments before the car exploded. It was a terrible and unfortunate sight at the same time. We realized you were orphans, so we decided to take you in. Alex and William's father looked meaningfully at his wife. The latter, catching his gaze, only lowered her eyes. When we found out who your real parents were, we couldn't believe our luck at first. Terry and David turned out to be the real richest of the rich. Yes, they already had that furniture business, Dad confirmed. And if it hadn't been for us, it probably would have been taken away by racketeers, split up into pieces. End of business. The 90s are dashing times. Alex looked perplexed at his adoptive mother and father. So what's it come to? You took over our late parents' business. Do you realize that this is a crime, that you are criminals yourselves? Mr. Carl raised his hand warningly. Don't judge so unequivocally, Alex. Think about it yourself. If you had been found not by us, but by, say, child services, would you be who you are now? The man sighed heavily. Yes, we may have acted somewhere that wasn't entirely fair, but we truly adopted you, introduced ourselves as your birth parents' best friends. It didn't raise any questions at the time. The notary deeded all the property we had to us. This was where William couldn't take it anymore. But then why did you separate me and my brother? And why did you take the surname of our real mother and father? Mrs. Vanessa only shrugged her shoulders. It was easier that way. Besides, as it turned out later, your folks and I were remarkably similar in appearance. Not identical, of course, but the same type. So in order not to complicate the paperwork, we changed our modest surname Morris to the more sonorous Smith. People hardly noticed the difference. And we didn't bother to tell them who we really were. And so it was that, over time, we came to be seen as your real parents. It turned out to be very uncomfortable with William. It's true, Mr. Carl added. Being a toddler, he flatly refused to accept us. So eventually Mrs. Vanessa and I got tired of his tantrums, showed weakness and gave him to our friends. They had no children and they gladly agreed to take William. However, we tried always to keep him under control, to help him with advice, not to lose sight of him. But on the other hand, he didn't have to know he had a twin brother. Mrs. Vanessa finished for her husband. By the time things had settled down, society knew us as a one-child family. We needed to maintain that image, and we did our best to keep information about William's existence from leaking to the press. William shook his head reproachfully. What kind of people are you? He asked them. They told me they were always happy to help, but not to come to your house. Or your important friends might think all sorts of things. You constantly emphasized my social status, saying that I was from a poor family and that I had to study a lot to achieve everything in this life on my own. And I believed you. You inspired me all these years. And now it turns out that you've been pretending to be someone else all this time, playing your part in public and lying to Alex and I. William jumped to his feet. The young man was overwhelmed with anger. How could you? How could you do this to us? And more importantly, why? Mrs. Vanessa, who by now was sobbing profusely, clutched at her heart. Mum, Alex shrieked and instinctively rushed to the woman. Okay, William, calm down. Let's not make a drama here. Are you suggesting I calm down knowing these two are crooks? Wake up, Alex. They just stole our lives, you and me. But they weren't the ones who killed our biological parents. His brother sieged him sharply. If it wasn't for Mom and Dad, we might not even be alive anymore. Remember, the car could have exploded at any second. It's a miracle they were close to the crash site. But they became father and mother to you, William said grimly. Lived in luxury, of course, but you didn't need anything either. Didn't you have to economize on everything so that there would be food in the house tomorrow? Do you think we would have been better off in the orphanage? Alex asked calmly, carefully pouring his foster mother some water. Think about it. Both of us had families. Yes, even though not everything was perfect, but... Children, please stop fighting, Mrs. Vanessa asked them suddenly. Mr. Carl and I realize that we have caused you a lot of pain and hurt by our actions. I think it is time for us to make amends to you. Mr. Carl looked at William with genuine sympathy. William, from now on you can be a full owner of the family business on an equal footing with Alex. We will sign all the documents. I don't want the people who have become the closest to me over the years to continue to suffer because of me. Alex's adoptive father tried to discreetly wipe away a tear, but he failed. The first tear was followed by a second. Mr. Carl wept silently, looking at his twin sons with love and regret. Please forgive us, Mrs. Vanessa begged them. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Just so long as you call me Mum again, Alex. And you, William. Looking at the sincerity of these people, William still forgave them just as his brother had done. After all, Alex was right. They had saved them by pulling them out of the burning car, and that was the most important gift to the boys. Eventually, William got part of the firm rewritten to him, and he became involved in the family business with Alex. As it turned out, William had an amazing flair for profitable commercial projects. Therefore, Alex thanked fate for the fact that he was able to meet his brother. That day, when the truth was revealed suddenly and unexpectedly, William could not stop thinking about one thing: how Marion and his children were. After a visit to Alex's parents, he asked his brother to take him to his beloved, and he promptly fulfilled his request. When William timidly entered the room, holding the door so that it would not creak, Marion, immersed in her troubles, did not immediately notice him. It was only when she turned round and saw her missing lover before her that the woman cried out loudly. Oh my goodness, William, is it you I'm wondering about? Marion slowly approached him and touched both hands to his face. No, love. I'm not dreaming. Tears glistened in the other brother's eyes. It's really me. Forgive me. I'm so sorry to you. William hugged the mother of his children tightly and began to shower her face and hands with kisses. Marion was embarrassed. She realized in front of her stood her true lover and the closest person in the world. A little later, when William told her his story and explained why he had failed to protect her from Peterson, Marion nodded understandingly and said, Now I see that you and your brother are completely different people. God, I'm so ashamed. I must have hurt him so much. I said so many nasty things to him when I came here. I can't believe he let me stay here after all that. I mean, he took my word for it and went looking for you. Absolutely amazing man, this Alex. Yeah, my brother turned out to be a good guy, William confirmed with a smile. He even helped me forgive our adoptees. Or rather, that's what they are to him. But to me, they've always been distant relatives. Not wanting to remember the bad things, William shook his head, as if to chase the heavy thoughts away. The most important thing for him now was to stay close to his beloved and his children, and do his best to get back on his feet. He understood that he could not live under the same roof with his brother forever. but now he had a chance to realize himself in the family business, and it was a chance he wouldn't miss. "That's your tramp brother and his wife. Are they going to live with us like that now?" inquired Trinity in a disgruntled tone the day after she and William returned home. "Well, how can you say that?" Alex became indignant. "William and Marion will be here for exactly as long as it takes. They are my family. Don't forget that, please. And show them at least a modicum of respect." "And I'm not family?" The bride frowned. "We have a wedding coming up, and it's like you don't notice anything now. No interest, only relatives on your mind." The young businessman quickly realized that Trinity was deliberately provoking him into a scandal. It was easy to imagine how she felt now that she wasn't the only one on Alex's mind. His fiancée, as it turned out, was very jealous, and that was something the younger Smith wasn't going to tolerate. "Trinity, honey," he began, "maybe we should cancel this wedding." "What?" She couldn't believe her ears. "But why?" "Because of your crazy in-laws. So tell me that this William has told you a bunch of nasty things about me. I'm sure you would never have thought of such a thing yourself." Alex only smiled politely. "It's not about my brother, and it's certainly not about me. It's about you, sweetheart. Look at you, you just can't live in peace. I really tried to live up to your high standards. But I guess it's time to face the truth. We're not right for each other." "No," Trinity shrieked angrily, "I'm not letting you go. I always get what I want, and I want to marry you." At that moment, the bride reminded him of a capricious child. "And I don't want to marry you," he answered her simply. "If we are so scandalized now, what will happen next? Haven't you thought of that? And then, I'm not a thing for you to possess. I hope in time you'll realize that this decision was the right one." Trinity wasn't prepared to put up with that attitude. Her pride made her quickly pack her suitcase and leave Alex's house for good that same day. The businessman's parents were upset at first that the wedding was disrupted, but eventually accepted their son's choice. The most surprising thing was that as soon as Trinity left, Alex's soul immediately became lighter. From now on, he decided to live a normal life, where no one would tell him what to do and how to do it, and where every decision would depend solely on himself. Sometime later, he met Cassandra. She was a nice, pretty girl of about 25. They had met by chance. Cassandra had twisted her leg trying to run across the road at a green light. When she was in the middle of it, the heel of her shoe broke, and she almost fell on the carriageway. Good thing Alex was nearby. He was the one who helped the stranger. "Let me give you a lift home," he offered. "I'm afraid with your bad leg, it's better not to walk on the tarmac here. It's time to complain to the road builders." Cassandra only laughed lightly in response and agreed to accept Alex's help. He didn't really know what it was about her that caught his eye, but there was something subtly familiar about her face. Cassandra reminded Alex of someone, but the young businessman couldn't understand who. From that moment on, he and Cassandra had a tender and kind relationship. At first it was more like friendship, but soon the young people realized that they were perfect for each other, and sometimes they could read the thoughts of their beloved. Cassandra had a young son from a previous relationship, Kevin, who suffered from a heart defect. And Cassandra was ready to work as a nurse in 3 shifts, just to raise money for the operation. Upon learning of this, Alex promised that he would definitely help the boy. "But don't worry, I will be able to get Kevin's surgery out of turn," the businessman assured the young mum. Cassandra only cried gratefully and kissed her lover. A couple of weeks later, Alex invited her to family dinner. He really wanted to introduce Cassandra to his parents, and she was not against it. However, when everyone was already gathered around the table, Mrs. Vanessa apparently accidentally dropped some of the cutlery. Cassandra bent down to help her pick up the spoons and forks. And at that moment, a small heart-shaped gold pendant fell out from behind the collar of her dress. "Oh my God!" Alex's mother exclaimed and involuntarily sat down on the edge of her chair, clasping her hands over her mouth. "No, it can't be. Not this. Not this. What happened?" "Alex didn't understand a thing, Mum. Don't scare me." Mrs. Vanessa looked horrified, first at her future daughter-in-law and then at her husband. Mr. Carl, noticing the pendant, immediately turned pale. The parents revealed to their son another terrible secret. It turns out that his fiancée was their own daughter. We needed the money then very much. The mother confessed everything. So we gave our baby girl to an orphanage, so she would never know who she was. Here, Mrs. Vanessa burst into loud tears. How could I, God, how could I? But Alex, I had no idea how I could explain the addition of a daughter to our family, and a daughter of your and William's age. I decided I would go all the way and live up to the image I'd created earlier with your dad. I don't think I regretted it very much later, but I couldn't change anything. This is the pendant we gave Cassandra at birth, Alex's father added. It's the only one like it. I had it specially ordered from a jewelry shop. Cassandra, daughter, don't hold a grudge. We've made so many mistakes in life. I'm afraid we won't be able to undo them until the end. Cassandra only gently stroked her fiancé's parents' shoulders. Let us not suffer for what we can no longer change. Especially since I had the most wonderful adoptive parents in the world. I always knew I wasn't related to them, but that didn't stop me from loving them and them from loving me. So my childhood was completely cloudless. Alex's parents gave their biological daughter a friendly hug. Alex, on the other hand, was so shocked by what he had learned that he couldn't immediately find the right words. So that's what had caught his eye about his fiancée. That's who she reminded him of, his own mother. Still, he managed to find the strength to forgive his parents. After all, he was once again convinced that he had the most wonderful bride in the world. A few months later, Alex and Cassandra had a beautiful wedding in nature. Since they were not blood relatives, they could marry without any problems. It was the happiest day for both of them. The guests, including brother William with his wife and children, considered the celebration to be the best they had ever been to. Cassandra's young son had undergone heart surgery and was now in perfect health. When he got older, he enjoyed playing with William's sons, as he was a frequent guest at Alex and Cassandra's house. The brothers still run a common business, and now their whole huge family is absolutely happy. Cassandra in the near future plans to open a small medical center to help women who have problems with the reproductive system. Now, having come out of maternity leave, she is actively improving her professional qualifications, hoping to help everyone who wants to have children. Why maternity leave? Yes, because recently she gave her beloved a daughter, whom the couple named Jenny. The girl is perfectly healthy and pleases her parents every day. I can imagine how surprised she'll be when she finds out we're getting married. Jennifer froze after overhearing a conversation in the cafe. Jennifer had always been considered an outgoing and cheerful girl. She had an attractive appearance, pleasant voice, good manners, so she easily got along with people. The slender blonde knew her advantages and skillfully used them. Short denim shorts and a black t-shirt with a pink panther from her travels. She was tanned and trim. Girls with a figure like that were usually described as slim. The barely perceptible smile and the twinkle in her eyes could drive anyone crazy. Jennifer wasn't the type to act arrogant, though. She was quite easy to talk to, but also clearly knew the boundaries. One day, she and her friends went to the beach. They decided to have a picnic right on the catamarans that were available for rent. The four girlfriends quickly organized everything, put together bags, swimsuits, towels, and some food and drinks, then drove to Sunny Beach by car. That was the name of the area where you could have a great vacation. At the beach set up for catamaran rentals, the girls were met by a young guy who worked there. He was wearing a short-sleeved shirt. The girls were in a good mood, not averse to flirting. They were bantering with each other, laughing and creating a joyful atmosphere. A sort of water bike with 4 seats and a platform for company allowed for bags and those wishing to rest. In mid-August, the sun was still very hot. Jennifer and Ashley threw towels over their shoulders, trying to protect them from possible burns. "Take your seats," Jennifer said. "Who's going to row?" "Girls, get in already." Time's running out. The boy hurried, and Ashley, eager for a quick dip in the cool water, was already splashing in. The girls' laughter broke out again. "Let's eat first," Emily said, pulling food out of her bags and setting it on the catamaran's ledge, a makeshift table. Salted fish, boiled rice, smoked chicken, grapes, and drinks appeared on it. "Oh, that's it. I'm diving," Jennifer said, standing on the edge of the catamaran in shorts and a tank top. After looking around at her friends and smiling broadly, she put her arms out in front of her and dove headfirst into the water. A dense plume of air bubbles rushed after her, struggling to catch up, but they proved too light and quickly burst on the surface of the river. "Jennifer, you're crazy," a real prankster Ashley said as she prepared to jump. There was a joyous shout. Jennifer showed herself on the surface. "Oof," she shouted into the water, splashing away. As she climbed onto the catamaran, the other girls' jumps followed. Ashley didn't take any chances, but slowly descended into the water. The happy faces and satisfied smiles said that the company really liked the place. Finally, it was time for the meal. Appetizing pieces of fish and chicken disappeared, caught by their fingers and sent to their mouths. "Hello, beauties," was heard from the side. Jennifer turned around and saw the exact same catamaran with two guys on board. A third was floating behind, holding onto a metal pipe. Catching Jennifer's eye, he waved at her, the vaguely satisfied smile of a well-fed cat. Jennifer only hummed, though she had time to notice his large, strong shoulders and tanned body. "Boys, alas, we're out of fish," said Sarah, who didn't like it when guys showed up in the company of girls. "And we were just about to buy you a treat," one of them mumbled. Jennifer got tired of hearing this and dove back into the river. The water was a stunning color, so clear and transparent in the sun that the girl felt incredible freedom and enjoyment of the water world. She could hold her breath for a long time, and so she was still underwater. The girl moved towards the surface. Oh no, something touched her feet. Jennifer sped up her movement. Now she could clearly feel her feet being touched by something unknown. She decided lightning fast that it was time to get out. But as she rushed forward, a man's face appeared in front of her. Jennifer drew in more air, ready to fend off the attack, but just in time to recognize the guy holding onto the catamaran. "Did you scare me?" Jennifer exclaimed. "Yes, that's what I wanted," he replied nonchalantly. The girl frowned. She was not prepared for such strange signs of attention. The boys were engaged in a rather unusual game. They were coming critically close to the girl's watercraft and then sailing further away. In the end, Sarah got tired of it all, and she stealthily climbed onto their catamaran and threw one of them into the water, and then the other. In this way, they managed to defeat the river pirates who were eager to violate their personal boundaries. Jennifer climbed onto the catamaran and sat on it, dangling her feet into the water. She fixed her hair, twisting the strands on her head in her purchased top and shorts. She looked seductive. She was basking in the sun, whose rays caressed her skin so pleasantly. But then a familiar face emerged from the water right in front of her again. This guy was definitely up to something. He calmly swam up to Jennifer and, placing his hands on the raft on either side of her, pushed himself up, half out of the water. Under his weight, one side of the catamaran sank into the water, and Jennifer, losing her balance, pulled forward. But to avoid contact with the intrusive stranger, she leaned backward, resting her hands on the floor. In a matter of seconds, her brain had assessed this guy as quite good-looking. His well-defined cheekbones and large mouth spoke of his love of life and ability to get what he wanted. And even now, it didn't bother him in the slightest that he was acting rather brash. But Jennifer's interest was piqued as well. She was curious to see what he would do next. She assumed he would go back into the water, but instead he slowly, calmly pulled himself even more forward, piling his body on top of the girl's. The girl was taken aback and opened her plump lips. And the guy from the water became so bold that he literally kissed Jennifer. She was outraged by the strange excitement that came out of nowhere and suddenly slapped him hard. But that didn't stop him at all. He bit her right thigh and then disappeared back under the water. Jennifer shuddered and climbed fully onto the catamaran. By this time, the boat's rental had come to an end. The whole hour had flown by. The girls had had enough of swimming and splashing in the water and were glad to be back on shore. After the cold appetizers, they wanted something hot. All four of them sat down at a table in the cafe. The waiter brought a folder with the menu, eyeing them languidly. They began to follow his index finger as it traveled down the lines. Soon the table was filled with flavorful food. Jennifer rubbed her palms together, anticipating the taste of her favorite hodgepodge. Hodgepodge. The perfect ending to the evening. Ashley laughed at her. "No licking," Jennifer parried. "I don't know about you, but I'll personally drink some of the dark stuff," Sarah mumbled, ducking into an oversized mug. Divine, she rolled her eyes, expressing her pleasure. Empty bellies were quickly filled, and the set table emptied quickly as well. The girls were about to leave when a guy approached them. Jennifer took her eyes aside, not wanting to see this misunderstanding. Leaving already, he inquired, purposely pointing his gaze in her direction. "Yeah, I need to hurry up so I can make a run to the wind. Rabies shot," she muttered unhappily, rubbing the bite site on her thigh. "Sorry, couldn't resist." "Your legs were too sweet," he mouthed, embarrassing the girl. Then he introduced himself. It turned out his name was Mitchell. The girls responded with their names, except Jennifer. Just then a waiter approached with a bill in hand. Mitchell reacted quickly, handing him a bank card. Jennifer glanced at the guy and hummed. Afterward, she caught the looks of her friends. They were looking at her puzzled, but it was time to leave. So the girls got up from the table. Jennifer didn't linger either, but Mitchell had one more surprise for her. He held out a single purple rose to her. Where did he get that from? Did he bring it in his breeches? Jennifer tried to ignore the flower, but Ashley still couldn't stand it and accepted it instead. Jennifer, look, Ashley pushed her in the side. What? She asked irritably. Glancing reluctantly at what was coming from her right, Ashley rounded her eyes and showed her friend the note. It had the sender's number and name written in it. She held it out to Jennifer and she slipped it into her pocket after looking at it. Monday printed out the week, and one by one the days spread out, all in business and obligations. Jennifer worked at a flower shop. She adored her job and didn't want to change it for anything. She loved her workplace, the material she interacted with, and the endless imagination she could bring to life, creating unique bouquets and exclusive arrangements, creating something with her hands. She did not feel that she was working, but creating and enjoying it. But here the door to the salon opened, and the very guy appeared on the threshold. "Good afternoon," he said hello. Then he leisurely approached the showcase and chose the largest bouquet. He told the sales clerk about it, and she accepted the payment from him. "Jennifer, is this for you?" The boy said. "I'm sorry, but if I'd bought the bouquet at another flower store, it could be seen as hidden competition." "How did you find me?" the girl inquired. "It wasn't hard. Some of your friends turned out to be more sociable than you. But that's okay. I think that in the future we will find a common language with you," he said, looking into her eyes. And there was a smile on his face that was barely recognizable, the kind that comes from people who feel they're one step ahead. This time, Jennifer decided that the guy had shown enough persistence to return the favor. After all, the one who made the first move is the one who should keep it going. As time went on, Jennifer realized that she didn't regret at all that she had once reciprocated his affection. The guy turned out to be a very attentive and caring suitor. He worked as the head of a construction team. They had been about 10 years engaged, not only in lifting old houses, but also built from scratch small-sized apartment buildings. Jennifer was proud of what her boyfriend was doing. The young people spent a lot of time together. Sometimes the guy picked her up from work, and they went for a walk with a final dinner in a cafe. And other times they met in the park and just wandered through the alleys, enjoying the autumn colors of the trees. And their relationship slowly began to grow stronger. And that reckless and unpredictable guy turned into a caring and loving young man, and perhaps a future fiancé. At least that was Jennifer's dream. She stood at the window and looked thoughtfully ahead. There, beyond the window ahead, could be seen other high-rise buildings with still empty playgrounds. All of Jennifer's thoughts were focused on the future in her life, where she was a happy wife and loving mother. Jennifer, her mother called softly to her again. "Would you put the kettle on and tell me what clouds my daughter is in?" she asked with a sly smile. She was familiar with this state of mind. It was a pity. It was all behind her. She had never married since her husband died. Rose. That was Jennifer's mom's name, was a beautiful woman. In her 40s, she still looked very attractive. Jennifer was born early. She had just turned 19 years old. She began to blossom like a blooming rose. How did Jason come into her life? Broad-shouldered, tanned. He quickly captured her attention, but unfortunately they weren't destined to live a long and happy life together. When Jason left them, Rosa at first tried to somehow establish her personal life. But raising a 9-year-old daughter took a lot of energy and time. She had to think about what to feed and clothe her tomorrow. It wasn't easy. Rosa dreamed of love, but only without any hope, especially looking at her own daughter, who day by day grew up, changed, and turned into a young woman that was clearly beginning to supplant her and push her aside, taking her place. But Rosa accepted it and managed to survive this little tragedy within herself. And from her husband, she was left a small 2-room apartment in which they lived together with Jennifer. It was a little cramped, but it was a little okay. They'd lived together for 12 years, and they would. "Mom, do you want a lemon?" Jennifer asked, shouting from the kitchen. "1 slice, and 1 spoonful of sugar," Rosa answered. Jennifer appeared in the hall with a tray on which there was a fragrant steaming tea with sweets. "Ah, what a lemon flavor. Just lovely," Rosa said, taking the first sip. "And imagine if we were now in the country, in the fresh air, sitting in the gazebo, listening to the birds singing and admiring the play of sunlight," dreamily said his mother. "Mom, are you a poet now?" Jennifer laughed, taking her first sip and biting into a strawberry cookie. A dog named Mike climbed into her lap. He was a toy terrier. He had a gorgeous short coat of white fur. He made himself comfortable and felt quite cozy. With eyes full of longing and misery, he looked furtively at his mistress. At last the heavens heard him, and he got a treat. "I'm thinking of raising the cottage and putting in a blooming garden that would be nice. What do you think?" she asked her daughter. Jennifer remembered the plot of land they had inherited from her father. Her father had loved to go there. He had found some happiness in that solitude. Jennifer was a little surprised at her mother's statement, since she rarely ever went there. And if they came with the family to the cottage, Rosa always found a reason to be dissatisfied. It was mosquitoes biting her, or a gnat poking her in the eye. Every time she was annoyed by the green grass growing everywhere. And then to hear her mother say something like that was a surprise to Jennifer. Even so, she liked the idea very much. "Of course, Mom, it would be great if we could keep what our father once started," her daughter answered her. In front of her eyes, she remembered that small plot of land where her father had managed to put a fence and a small hut. The place was good, located near the city, but it was located in a relative lowland, and it often drowned. That's why the house had to be raised higher. It was sunny here. Nearby was a forest and a gorgeous spacious field, where you could leisurely stroll and breathe the forest air, and in winter suddenly take skis and go on the forest road, and down a hill. Jennifer remembered well how her father had taught her how to ski, how to turn, and how to ski downhill without fear. Thinking about it, Jennifer suddenly remembered that her boyfriend Matthew was doing just that. So she thought she could talk to him about it. "You know, Mom, I just realized that Matthew's in the house lifting business. I'll talk to him, and I think he'd be willing to help us out," Jennifer said. "But for a fee, of course, at a discount," Rosa added. "Yes, exactly," Jennifer pointed out. The next time she met her boyfriend, they were walking through the park. Matthew was telling Jennifer about his childhood. It turned out that he had grown up in an orphanage and remembered his parents very well, with whom he still kept in touch. This was despite the fact that they had surrendered him to the orphanage when he was 7 years old. His mother always told him that she couldn't have done otherwise. His father was on the road a lot and rarely brought money home. The rent was huge, and she still had to support herself and the child. Yes, she'd put Matthew in an orphanage. She told him she'd be sure to pick him up in a month. But when she came back a month later, it turned out she'd only come to see him. And she would tell him again that she would pick him up next time in about a month. At first, Matthew believed his mother, believed that she would really pick him up and not leave him here. But as time went on, he realized that each time it was put off until later. At one point, he developed a huge resentment towards them. When he turned 18, he finally became a senior. He came home and was discouraged. After all, the house was orderly and cozy. His mother met him in a fancy, expensive dress. When she saw her son on the threshold of the house, she was extremely surprised. She stood in front of him holding a glass of red wine in her hands. She was wearing expensive jewelry and heavy gold earrings, raising her hand up and waving slightly, as if correcting her numerous bracelets on her wrist. She said, "Ah, who do I see? Son, how big have you gotten? How have you grown?" his mother spoke. Matthew was even a little taken aback by this greeting. She had not been interested in him at all for the last few years, and had not visited him once in 4 years. Come in, she said, opening the door wide. Matthew stepped hesitantly into the house. His mother went to the mirror and fixed his hair. Was your visit so unexpected? I didn't even have time to prepare. She turned to face her son, and was silent for a few seconds. I'm sorry, darling, I didn't visit you, but I had my reasons. Rather, she began to justify herself. You know yourself, I had to work. Money doesn't come easy. Would you like to have a little drink? I've got some fine 10-year-old wine. Your father's at work, as usual, she said, going to the cupboard and pulling out a bottle of red wine. The woman spoke to him as if there had been no shelter, no separation, no endless waiting, no tears shed as Matthew realized he had been abandoned, forgotten and left in the care of complete strangers. It was strange, incomprehensible. The young man realized once again that no one wanted his feelings and that his parents had never needed him. Shall I pour some wine into the glasses? Amber, grabbing one of them, took a small sip and walked a little forward. It was pretty clear that they had absolutely nothing to talk about. Matthew's parents lived a very different life. The boy kept listening to his mother and didn't know what to say to her in response. To be honest, he had expected a little different. Amber continued to remain standing still. Her look was confused. It even looked like she was holding a glass of wine just to pretend to be very busy. She looked at her son. She knew exactly what she had done. Except that her pride and her desire to remain good did not allow her to meet and talk to him properly. I have to go now, he mumbled. Amber closed her mouth to say something to him, but there was nothing to say. Matthew lowered the corners of his lips slightly and headed for the door, saying goodbye. Wait. Suddenly his mother spoke up. Matthew stopped and looked at her again. Take care of yourself, she said. Matthew nodded at her words and then left her house. Such a revelation from Matthew touched Jennifer to the core. She felt genuinely sorry for him. She told him that he had a big heart for being able to find the strength to keep in touch with them no matter what. She decided to change the subject and told him that they had been left a house from their father. She also said that her mother had decided to take over the property and clean it up. That's a good thing, Matthew said. Yes, I think so too. Except that my mother wants to raise the cabin first, or move it to another place. And I thought of you right away. No, don't worry. I wanted to tell you right away that the work will be paid for, as it should be. It's just that I know you and trust you as an experienced builder, Ashley said. Matthew replied, sure, no problem. We just need to pick a time for me to get there and assess the situation. On the appointed day, Jennifer, along with Matthew, were to arrive at the property where Jennifer's mother was waiting for them. However, just before evening, the flower store received an order for an arrangement for a major restaurant. They had ordered black cubes of flowers from Jennifer before, and they really liked her work. They didn't want to miss out on such a customer, especially since they had a friendly and trusting relationship. Jennifer called Matthew and said, Matthew, hi. Listen, I've got a job. I'd hate to turn it down. You should probably go by yourself, and your mom will meet you there and tell you everything and explain it. And then I'll meet you tonight when you pick me up from work. She loved being around him so much as a little girl. She took every opportunity to be in that role every time. Matthew agreed and drove straight to the dacha on the Baikal Highway. As he drove a little way from the city, he was confronted with a riot of colors. The foliage on the trees was ablaze with orange and red colors. Bright yellow flashes added color. Here a brick garage showed up, after which he had to turn right. Matthew knew that such gardening areas often lacked numbers on the houses. He called Rosa and asked for directions. She replied, go straight ahead. I'll meet you here. Soon Matthew saw a slender woman who looked quite young. He was even surprised that Jennifer was her daughter. Matthew parked and got out of the car, said hello and introduced himself. Rose was surprised too, to say the least. She hadn't expected to see such a handsome and attractive man. Her eyes quickly assessed his figure and face. Matthew was a little worried, but wasted no time in getting right down to business. He looked around the property, walked around and then back to the cabin. It was in the corner of the house, faintly lit by the sun. Matthew walked around it on all sides, assessing it with his gaze. We can basically pick it up. It won't be difficult. Have you picked out a place to put it yet? He inquired. Honestly, I hadn't thought about it, since I assumed it would only be lifted. Rose replied confusedly from beside Matthew. She was feeling tense and couldn't explain the reason for it, but she knew for sure that she liked Matthew a lot. They discussed the nuances of moving the house some more. Rosa asked about the cost of labor and materials. Matthew calmly and easily explained the step-by-step process of the work. Rosa liked the way he explained everything. She literally melted as she listened to him talk about moving the house. Afterwards, they agreed to call each other when Rosa had decided what to do next. Interestingly, Matthew also liked Rosa very much. He was attracted by her maturity, wisdom, and childlike directness, which slipped through during communication. Before leaving, Matthew wished the lady of the house well. Rose, innocence itself, smiled faintly at him, lowering her eyes to the floor. When the builder left, Rosa was relieved. She couldn't believe she'd been so excited to meet a handsome young man. The next time Matthew called Rosa to ask clarifying questions, she felt her heart beat faster. She was glad to hear his voice. His timbre made the woman anxious, and she sometimes held her breath without noticing it. Only when she caught herself doing so did she remind herself to exhale. Jennifer and Matthew were well aware of their attraction and obvious interest in each other. However, they didn't know what to do about it next. After all, Jennifer and Matthew had already discussed their upcoming wedding. They were serious about getting married so that they could spend their lives in love, fidelity, and understanding. Matthew cared deeply for Jennifer and couldn't do that to her. He couldn't tell her that it was over between them, that what was happening between them was losing its meaning. Matthew, as well as Rose, wanted to banish thoughts about the progression of their relationship. But those thoughts, like pesky bees with sweet pollen, circled around, teasing and beckoning with the scent of love and pleasure. Rose waited for Matthew to call her with clarifying questions about the future project, and Matthew waited for Rosa to call him to clarify anything else. Every time her phone rang, she hurried to look at the screen, to make sure it was him. And how frustrated she got when the other person called. Rosa had become exactly like a girl, wrapped up in the feelings that were building up and running through her body and mind. But Rosa also realized that she could not destroy her own daughter's happiness. She realized that she had to keep herself in control, not to give in to emotion, giving preference to sound reasoning. Thinking about all this, she realized that as a mother she had to think of her child first and foremost. But when she told herself this, another inner voice objected. You spent your whole life raising your daughter. You took care of her, raised her, worked at a job you didn't like so that your family wouldn't be poor. And now, when your happiness is so close, you give it up. Rose stood in front of the mirror, studying her face and trying to find the right answer there. She was really struggling with herself, and it was unbearably difficult. The voice told her that she was still young, beautiful, full of strength. She had her whole life ahead of her and could build a new happiness. But were her feelings for Matthew real? Maybe she was fooling herself, impressed with him only because of the possibility of a new home? Rosa certainly thought about that too. After all, what luck to kill two birds with one stone: a new home and a handsome man. As they say, you can't tell what's going on. How difficult it is to discern the true motives lurking in the depths of each of us. People are so used to surrounding themselves with reasons, purposes, explanations, and reasoning that in the end they cease to understand anything when they close themselves off to these circumstances and coincidences. Then Matthew met up with Jennifer again. He had managed to miss her. How did it go? Were you able to work things out? I hope my mother didn't overload you with tasks? The girl asked, smiling. Yes, your mother and I agreed easily and have already discussed the first stage of the work. Matthew answered cheerfully. Listen, that's wonderful. I'm very glad that my mother decided to take on this house. My dad loved this place. And it's a nice place. I'd hate to see it abandoned and neglected, Jennifer explained. Then she walked over to Matthew and climbed into his lap, wrapping her arms around his hips. She pulled him against her, stroking his head, kissing his neck. Their lips made contact. What a sweet kiss it was. Matthew gripped Jennifer's hips tighter, and then, changing positions, lowered her onto the couch. Once on top of her, Jennifer struggled, trying to get out from under him. Matthew accepted the challenge and continued to play with her. Heavy breathing and squeals could be heard as Jennifer kept trying to jokingly beat Matthew, but eventually she was exhausted and gave up. A joyous laugh escaped his lips. Matthew also laughed as he continued to fool around. "Just like when you were a kid. I'm going to crush you with my knees," Jennifer exclaimed, using her final argument to win. "Come on, push, 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 and harder. But Jennifer, pull yourself together." Matthew lifted her up. But Jennifer could do nothing as the rest of her strength was taken away by the laughter. It was important for her to breathe, not to choke on the incredible joy that was overwhelming her at the moment. Finally, Matthew lowered himself onto the girl with his whole body and stroked her hair. Their faces became more serious. They enjoyed looking at each other. Matthew scrutinized her brown eyes, her nose, lips, and chin. He leaned over and kissed her neck. The most vulnerable place inside both of them, passion flared and all the extra clothes flew away. "I'm sure you're the man I'd like to spend the rest of my life with. Tell me, is it the same for you?" Jennifer asked Matthew after they had enjoyed each other. They were lying on the couch, covered by a blanket. They were now in Matthew's apartment. He had purchased it relatively recently and was very pleased with it. The apartment was in a nice and presentable neighborhood, the sunny side of the spacious room. "I am very happy to have met someone like you," he said. "You are the most precious thing to me, and I don't want to lose you," the guy added. At that moment, he looked a little tense and his gaze was inward. "Is something wrong?" the girl asked him. It was as if she suspected that something had changed between them. "No, everything's fine. I just pictured our future with you, family life, our possible children. A house full of love and good food. You're going to cook, aren't you?" he asked, looking at Jennifer. She waved her head in the negative. "And baking pies," as basic Matthew shook his chin negatively. "How could it be? You're going to be my wife, so you're going to cook," he said, insisting. "Yes, that's right. I'll be your wife. Beautiful, rested, happy. And let the cook, whom we will hire to work for us, do the cooking," she said, as if nothing had happened. "Oh yes," Matthew was surprised. "A businesswoman," the potential wife replied. "The most beautiful, rested, happy wife. Will be filled with your energy from the stars of extraterrestrial planets," Matthew joked as he wrapped Jennifer in his arms. They laughed again, and the couple hid under the covers. But now the wedding preparations began. It was an exciting moment for Jennifer. She wanted everything to go right, everything to be beautiful, exquisite. She wanted to be in a snow-white wedding dress, so that all the guests were in jackets and outfits. She personally puzzled over decorating the hall herself, with fresh flowers, choosing the color scheme and their arrangement. "Jennifer, baby, you're a bride, not a florist. Give this job to someone else. What are you struggling for?" Ashley, her friend, turned to her. "No, I want it to be beautiful. Especially since I feel like they're all doing something wrong," the bride-to-be replied, enthusiastically arranging a large basket of flowers, one flower at a time. "I understand you. I like to arrange my clothes the way I want them in my store too," Ashley said. "Today is an amazing day. It's the day two people seal their bond with rings and create another unit of society." A lot of guests were gathered in front of the registry office. All of them wanted to be present at the registration of Jennifer and Matthew's wedding. White cars were decorated with bouquets and gold ribbons. Matthew was waiting for Jennifer in the hall. He was a little worried, but here he caught a glimpse of Rosa. She was wearing a beautiful burgundy dress with transverse translucent inserts of the same color. It fit her figure perfectly, emphasizing her slim waist. Her brown hair lay in waves on her shoulders. She looked at Matthew, and it was as if he could read everything in her gaze. As it happened, fate had decided otherwise, and he'd met Jennifer much earlier. There was nothing he could do about it now, because he was already a husband. The woman smiled softly at him, her eyes squinting slightly. But then the applause broke out, and the bride finally appeared in the hall. She looked like an angel descended from heaven, all in white with a long veil. She approached Matthew slowly and looked like a princess from some kingdom. Matthew was even a little timid in front of her, because she looked so good and statuesque. Her face shone with a smile. Matthew was relieved to see the shape of her face, and the open mouth with the corners of her lips turned up. The unnecessary tension immediately vanished somewhere. She looked at him with a gentle gaze, and Matthew was once again convinced that he had made the right choice. Even in spite of the recent events, the registrar read out the necessary standard phrases, and both bride and groom said their I do's. Both signed their signatures, after which they exchanged rings. Jennifer was overflowing with happiness from the inside out. She was ready to jump up on the spot and scream so loudly that everyone around her could hear how happy she was. There was loud and boisterous applause. Flashes flashed across the room. Just everyone went out into the large foyer. As immediately there was a loud clap, it was a friend of the groom unsealed a bottle of champagne. The guests amicably gathered in a pile of crystal glasses. Their clinking sounded, and the golden bubbles sang and hurried to take their places. After the registry office, all the guests went to the restaurant to properly celebrate this solemn event. Here already awaited them beautifully served tables filled with a variety of dishes, appetizers, and drinks. The invited toastmaster prepared unforgettable contests for the guests, which left no one indifferent. The newlyweds performed their unique wedding dance. They specially studied it to dance on this day. Their couple was irresistible. They moved to the beat of the music confidently and calmly. They twirled in the dance as if they were floating in the air. They looked at each other without noticing anyone around them. Toward the end of the evening, the toastmaster announced the white dance. The ladies invite the gentlemen. "Come on, dear guests, don't be shy. Fill the hall," she said, and then headed to the table for a little rest and tea and cake. "Jennifer, my sunshine, you are always beautiful. And today especially, so be careful when you ask me to dance. Or better still, don't go at all," Matthew said, holding his bride's hand. She covered her mouth with her palm and giggled. "All right, darling, I'll do just the opposite," she said. Then, with a sly glance at Matthew, she headed toward the guest she'd spotted earlier. He realized that nothing of the sort was going to happen, but still he found himself thinking that his wife was too beautiful. "Matthew, may I ask you to dance?" A woman's voice sounded behind him. He turned around and was surprised to see Rose in front of him. Her gaze was enigmatic. She held out her hand to him. "I'd be honored," he said, rising from his chair. "I'm very glad that my daughter's husband is a man like you," Anna said. "I think you can make my daughter happy." She looked into Matthew's eyes and he said nothing. Not because he didn't know what to say, but he just didn't even think about it. Rose, on the other hand, saw it a little differently. "I've done a lot for my daughter in my time. I forgot about my personal life just to make her happy," she said. The two moved slowly in a dance. Matthew listened attentively to his mother-in-law. "Oh, how I wish I could once again experience that very feeling called love," she said, looking into Matthew's eyes. "You tell me, I'm still good-looking?" she asked in surprise. It put Matthew in a bit of a stupor at first, but then he found something to answer. "Absolutely, you look great," he mumbled, deliberately addressing her in you to keep his distance. "I beg of you, please, not again. Speak to me on you, because I'm not that old yet, am I?" She asked again, and again she fixed her gaze on his eyes. Matthew immediately realized that this woman was not as simple as she might seem at first glance, and she was clearly playing a double game. "There's no doubt you look beautiful. I would hardly believe you have such a grown daughter if I were not her husband," he muttered, and laughed. "It is indeed a shame that fate has brought us together in this way. But it's more interesting this way," she said. And Matthew suddenly noticed the unfamiliar light in her eyes. He realized again that this woman was very attractive. It was as if she was at the peak of her beauty at almost 40 years of age. She still continued to look into his eyes, and Matthew did the same. He felt as if she was conjuring him, wreathing him with her eyes, her facial expressions, her perfume scent. Why on earth is she doing this? Why is she playing this game and seducing him on purpose? When the dance was over, Matthew kissed her hand and then turned back to his favorite bride. "You move great," Jennifer remarked, who looked at them from the sidelines. "Yeah, have you noticed that?" Matthew interjected. "Yeah, my partner, you wouldn't believe it, but he suddenly got dizzy and left me halfway through the dance," Jennifer admitted. "Oh my God, what did you do to him?" Matthew playfully interjected. "Nothing, just told him to move a little faster," the bride replied, shrugging her delicate shoulders. Immediately after the wedding, Rosa returned to talking about building the house, as the winter in the region was quite warm, so the work could be started even in November. Before the wedding, the matter had been on the back burner for a while, and now Rosa wanted to revisit it. She called Matthew and made an appointment. She was going to make a contract with him. Matthew arrived at the cottage as they had previously agreed with Rosa. Despite the fact that it was a small house, it was quite cozy. A brick stove with a transparent door through which one could admire the fire. Comfortable, soft sofa, table and wall lamps that created a special atmosphere in the evening. But since it was a sunny day, there was no need for them yet. Parking the car, Matthew opened the gate and looked at the house, smoke billowing from the chimney. He knocked, and the owner opened the door. She was wearing a warm sports suit, which looked very stylish on her. Her hair was gathered into such a bump on the top of her head, which made her face look elongated, and you could see her features clearly. "Ah, come in. How glad I am to see you," cooed Rosa, letting him into the cottage. "Come and be a dear guest," she reckoned, like a cunning fox. Matthew went in and sat down in an armchair near the sofa. It was pretty nice, clean and tidy. Rose looked at Matthew, then shifted her gaze higher. "Oh, I wanted to hang a picture. Found it in the closet the other day. Such a nice painting. And this is where it would fit the most." She mouthed to herself without waiting for an answer. "Of course you will. You've just arrived here," and her face lit up with a smile. She pulled the very painting out of the closet and prepared a ladder in front of the wall. She motioned for Matthew to get up from his seat and then walked over to the wall and held the painting up. Matthew looked at the whole thing and agreed with Rosa. "Now you back up and I'll take a look," she mumbled. Matthew moved closer and took the painting by the wooden frame with the three-dimensional pattern. Rose stood in front of it. When she lowered the painting, she turned to face him. The woman was in no hurry to leave, but instead stretched out her time, looking at her guest absent-mindedly. The man also stared at her. He had not yet had time to realize anything, when Rose suddenly burst into his lips with a passionate kiss. The painting fell out of Matthew's hands and rolled onto the chair. The unknown power Rosa possessed was transmitted to Matthew. The kiss felt good, and for a few seconds he lost his mind. Rosa's lips were so sweet that Matthew didn't realize how the circumstances had turned his head. Within a couple minutes they were horizontal. Rosa left him no choice but to take the initiative. "Only I have one condition," she said when everything happened. "Let's agree to keep this between us. I don't want to hurt my daughter, because you love her." Matthew was in complete agreement. He could hardly understand how this could have happened. He hung the picture above his chair, and afterward they signed the agreement together. The woman looked like a fed-up cat. Matthew returned home full of a variety of feelings: regret, confusion. But he had to admit that he had enjoyed what had happened at the cottage. In the evening he stopped by Jennifer's store and took her home. They drove around town for a while and stopped at a cafe. Matthew kept quiet a lot and tried to avoid looking at Jennifer. He was greatly disturbed by what had happened during the day. "My mom called me," she mumbled, causing additional excitement on his part. "Yeah, what did she say?" Matthew asked, nervous. "She says you made a pact with her." "That's great. I'm glad there's finally some traffic on a long, neglected site," his wife said. "You seem a little different today. Are you puzzled about something?" "No, I'm just thinking about where to start," Matthew said. "Thinking about something else." Jennifer took his hand. "Let's think about it later, and now we'll rest," she said with a smile. "Yes, of course, I agree," the husband mumbled, afraid that his wife might recognize what had happened from his embarrassed eyes. They continued to eat dinner. Jennifer talked about the flowers, about the people who came to pick up the bouquets, about the fact that her customer was satisfied with the new compositions. Matthew pretended to listen, inserting phrases, but he couldn't be fully present. He was shocked by what had happened. He never thought he would find himself between two fires. "Dim, can you hear me? Can we go home?" "I'm so sleepy," Jennifer said. Matthew didn't notice how he fell out of the conversation. "Yes, you're right. I'm tired today. I can't wait to go to bed," he said, rising from his seat and kissing her cheek. After the passion, Matthew decided that it couldn't happen again. The next time he saw Rosa, he told her so. The woman replied that she understood him perfectly and agreed. They could have stopped there, if it hadn't been for Rosa, who had no intention of doing so. She had a long, sleeping personality inside her that wanted to come out, to show itself in all its glory. Looking at Matthew, her son-in-law, who was beside his daughter, who was hugging him, who was looking at him, she began to feel jealous inside her. She was aware that it was wrong, but it was too hard for her to deal with her own feelings. She now looked at Matthew not as her daughter's husband, but as a handsome man to whom she had every right. After all, she would try her luck, and then it would be up to him to decide if he wanted to stay with her or still choose a wife. The next day, Jennifer went to work. A new shipment of flowers had arrived yesterday, most of which were white. Jennifer wanted to dilute the plainness a little and paint the individual flowers in other shades. She ordered the paint for them from an online store. Today she brought it with her from home. She poured some cold water into several wagons and then poured powder into each one. In one she placed white roses, in the second white asters, and in the third a flower called lily, which had a large V-shaped bud. Now it was necessary to wait some time for the flower to absorb the water, and it, in turn, had to fill every cell of it to give the desired effect. But by evening, the flowers had taken on stunningly rich and beautiful hues. Jennifer put the gloves back on, took them out and put the flowers in again, but now in clear water. On one hand, the glove caught on a thorn that was carefully hidden behind a leaf. And the glove tore, and some of the dye got on the florist's skin. But Jennifer was almost finished with the job, so it wasn't too bad. She finished what she had started and washed her hands afterward. Then she stayed at her workstation, and afterward she locked up the store. She was going home alone tonight. Matthew had called her to let her know that he was running late because the customer had some questions about their work. When Jennifer entered the house, the first thing she did was take a shower. Then she warmed up some food and sat down at the table and turned on a new show on her laptop. While still at work, she was feeling seriously hungry. However, now that she had food in her mouth, she suddenly realized that she didn't have much of an appetite. After eating some pilaf, she pushed her plate away and took tea. She decided to herself that she'd probably overdone the coloring today. Besides, some of it had gotten on her skin. Without waiting until late afternoon, she went to bed. She felt a little dizzy, and it felt like someone was rocking her bed. Within seconds, she fell into a deep and dense darkness. Snakes began to appear from everywhere. They were gigantic in size and stared at Jennifer with burning yellow eyes. They stuck out their twin tongues and hissed. They bunched up in the air and came closer to her. One snake touched her foot and then slowly curved and began to climb up her body. It reached her stomach and touched her tongue a couple times before reaching her chest and above, a blue snake with huge scales that were cold to the touch. The snake coiled around her neck. Jennifer tried to pull it away, but there was no way she could get a grip on it. The snake slipped out of her hands in seconds each time. It was getting harder and harder to breathe. Jennifer strained as hard as she could to push the cold-blooded monster away. The woman felt her entire body become hot. Her forehead covered in sweat, she fought desperately against the snake, but it was clearly stronger. Eventually, she managed to rip it off her chest, and she woke up with a sharp upward thrust of her body. Matthew was next to her. He did his best to calm her down and asked what was wrong. Jennifer was breathing heavily. Her pupils were dilated. Matthew said he would get some water. A wet strand of hair fell over her face. Jennifer struggled to get rid of it. "Is everything all right?" her husband asked. "Are you shivering all over?" He touched his palm to her body. "Yes, I'm fine. I had a horrible, horrible dream," Jennifer complained to him. "It's over now," Matthew reassured her. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, tangling herself in the blankets and taking her husband's hand. When morning came, Jennifer climbed out of bed to start getting ready for work. Matthew always got up before her. As soon as she got out of bed, she immediately felt as if her body was filled with lead. It felt heavy, as if someone had put weight on her shoulders on purpose. Jennifer glanced at the clock. For the first time in her life, she had overslept for work. She tried to speed up to get out of the house faster. In an unfortunate move, she bumped into a table leg. "Damn, that hurts," she said, sitting on the chair and rubbing her sore leg. Finally, she pulled herself together and went outside. She decided to skip breakfast today since she had no appetite at all. Jennifer took her workstation and started going through the notes she usually left for herself so she wouldn't forget anything just in case. This time it was too hot in the store. Even the working air conditioner wasn't exactly filling the room with fresh air. Jennifer spent several hours in constant agony. She was plagued by terrible weakness. Eventually she was forced to close the store and return home. How happy she was to crawl into bed and do nothing. Her health left much to be desired. Of all the food she could eat, all she could eat was water. When Matthew returned home, he was very surprised to find his wife lying in bed. Jennifer had always been active, and it was impossible to imagine her at such an activity. She told Matthew about her condition. He offered to call a doctor, but the girl refused, saying that tomorrow she would surely be better. Meanwhile, the foundations for the new house were already being poured. Matthew came to the site to see how everything was progressing. His boys were doing a good job. Rosa said there was something she wanted to talk to Matthew about. He didn't mind. They went inside the cabin. So far, the foundation hasn't set. It's still holding on to the rebar, Rose said. Matthew, you've forgotten all about me. Was I really just a fling for you? Matthew hadn't expected that from her. He thought that she was a grown woman and quite aware of her actions. After all, she knew that he was going to marry her daughter, and any further development of their relationship was out of the question. Why do you say that? He asked her a counter question. But Rose, instead of answering, went to the front door and locked it. Matthew suddenly felt like a real hostage. Rose, you and I talked about how we should stop being so close, Matthew said, hoping that this unrestrained, apparently unconcerned woman would be reasonable. Do you really want my daughter to find out? Suddenly, Rosa turned to blackmail. Not at all. You and I had a deal. Look, it was a moment of weakness, and you're the one who started it, Matthew said. Well, if I started it, then I'll continue, she said, stretching the buttons of her cream-colored, loose-fitting blouse. Matthew had already realized that this woman was not as simple as she looked, and that she probably still had a lot of skeletons in her closet. He decided to honor her request, and, taking a couple steps forward, unbuckled his belt and tossed it aside. My daughter Jennifer is a very good girl. She's young, she's beautiful. She has a great figure, Rosa said. Matthew didn't quite understand where she was going with this, or why she was having this conversation. But let it be known to you that not all people are as good on the inside as they are on the outside. Believe me, my boy, she said. What do you mean by that? Matthew didn't understand. You know, Matt, you're just a good man. You're the kind of man I wish I had more of. You hear me? I'd hate for you to end up with a broken heart. But why should I be broken-hearted all of a sudden? Matthew asked, still not knowing what he was talking about. I'm certainly glad you and Jennifer got married. But I have to warn you, she's a pretty fickle person. You know, creative people, they're so fickle. One day they have one thing on their mind, the next day another. One day she's married to you, the next week she'll say she's out of love. And the interesting thing is that it's perfectly normal for them, Rosa said casually. Are you saying that Jennifer married me out of emotion? He asked her. Well, not exactly like that. Emotionally. But she came to my house recently. Not alone. Another man gave her a ride. They had a nice conversation, joking about something she said, trying to add more fuel to the fire. Didn't you get it? Matthew tensed. Why are you surprised? When a woman is beautiful, you have to keep an eye on her. She threw off the blanket and walked to the window, completely naked. She took out a cigarette and lit it with her lighter. Matthew had never seen Rose smoke before. Don't look so surprised, it's just that as a mother I have to set a good example for my daughter, she mumbled, meaning that she never smoked in front of her daughter. Matthew was a little shocked at what Rosa had just told him. And who knows whether to believe her or not. Matthew returned home. He walked past his wife for a long time, remembering the words his mother-in-law had said to him. Jennifer was still not feeling well. She had already gone to the doctor, and the doctor said that she was probably allergic to beautiful substances. This surprised the girl a little, since it was not the first time she used them. And Matthew, after the new facts about his wife, suddenly began to think that she might have been cheating on him for a long time already. With the help of such thoughts, he was able to somehow reduce the absurdity of his own actions. What can you do? We all have our sins. Matthew asked how Jennifer was feeling. She told him that it would take time for the toxin to completely leave her system. Matthew listened to what she said, but he didn't believe her. He needed to get on with his business. He kissed her on the cheek, not his usual lips, and walked out the door. Rosa called him today too. She asked for a meeting. They found a secluded cafe, where they sat at a far table. There was a friendly atmosphere, pleasant quiet music was playing in the cafe. The couple ordered some food for themselves, but as soon as Rosa moved her plate to her, she said, "Is something wrong?" Matthew asked. "No, nothing's wrong." "On the contrary," she said. Matthew became alert and looked at his companion even more carefully. "Matt, this may come as a surprise to you, but I'm very happy about it." "I never thought I'd get to experience this again," she said. She had a slight smile on her face. "What do you mean?" Matthew asked again, not knowing what other surprises he could expect from this woman. "I'm so happy, because you and I are going to have a baby," she said. Matthew froze in place. This was an overwhelming information for him. In an instant, his mind was jumbled. Was it serious? He decided to ask. "Of course it is. Why would I lie to you? I already realize that you and I are both in a difficult situation. You and I have made a mess of things. And we've dragged someone close to both of us into it. But since you and I made this mess, it's up to you and me to clean it up. Don't we?" She glared at Matthew. "And what do you suggest?" he asked again. It seemed like he should be excited about having a baby. But right now he felt like a complete idiot. What a mess. What was he thinking? "This may sound strange, but I think it's the right thing to do if you and I get married. Then you and I will already have our child legally married," Rose mumbled. "What about Jennifer?" Matthew asked her. "What about Jennifer? She's got her whole life ahead of her. She'll find someone," Rosa replied, not seeing anything strange here at all. After spending some more time together and discussing the circumstances in more detail, the lovers said goodbye. After all this, Matthew did not know how to look his wife in the eye. The only thing that saved him was the fact that Jennifer was not so pure either and might have been seeing someone else in parallel with him for a long time. Rosa's words sounded so convincing that Matthew was willing to believe the absurdity of it. Perhaps he was more comfortable with it himself. At least in a way, it justified his sins. Meanwhile, Rosa continued to insist. She began to call Matthew more often and to broach the subject of their marriage. "Matthew, perhaps this is our destiny, you and I. If you look at it from that perspective, Jennifer was just the reason we were able to meet you. Have you thought about that?" Rose asked him. To be honest, Matthew was already completely confused and had no idea how to sort it all out and put it all in its proper place. "Matthew, listen to me. When I first saw you, I knew right away that you were the man of my life. You are a very good man, and I can't believe that you could do this to me. You wouldn't abandon me and our future child," she mouthed with an iron voice. Matthew was horrified. He managed to swallow something. He didn't want to hurt anyone at all, to bring suffering. But things were shaping up this way, and he was finding himself the main culprit for everything going on in his situation. No matter how it was done, he would betray someone, whether it was Jennifer or Rose, who was now carrying a child under her heart. Completely confused in his thoughts, Matthew decided to meet his friend. He had long ago invited him to visit him, promising to prepare a luxurious bath with fragrant birch and fir brooms. "Ben, hello. Listen, why am I calling? Are we going to have a bath soon?" he inquired. "Hello, dear, hello. Of course, come, we'll arrange a bathhouse of the highest order. You'll be satisfied," and that's 100% his best friend assured him. Matthew didn't hesitate to pack the necessary things and headed straight to his place. The bathhouse was really great. The damp heat, the strong aroma of fir and birch. And after that, hot kebabs and hot drinks were waiting for them. Taking a break from the positive stress and knocking off a little hunger, Matthew decided to tell Ben about all the things that had been going on with him lately. "Bro, you're screwed, I'll tell you," Tidy mouthed, sending a golden piece of meat into his mouth. "I'll tell you what. "I don't envy you," he pronounced, relaxing heartily. "But to be honest, it's certainly no laughing matter around here. And anyway, here's what I think: that Rose of yours is a real piece of work. Fooling you, and she's not the least bit embarrassed about it," Ben said. "What makes you think that?" "Honestly, I haven't noticed it," Matthew replied. "Well, it's plain to see. She's manipulating you, blackmailing you for some reason, scaring you into telling your daughter. Why doesn't she love her daughter so much? It's not often you see a mother trying to steal a man away from her own daughter," Ben said. "She probably got you a big discount, didn't she?" Ben squinted his right eye. "Yes, I got a good discount, but it wasn't because of her, it was because of my wife," Matthew replied. Yes, of course I understood that," Ben said. "Of course, Matt, it's up to you. But your story smells like something unpleasant." He raised his glass and said, "Let's drink that we never go off course, that no one confuses us." Matthew supported him fully, and both of them emptied their glasses in a gulp. The pickles on the saucer finally ran out. After his conversation with Ben, Matthew began to see the situation differently. Why would Rosa be slandering her daughter? She's doing everything she can to keep Matthew with her and dump Jennifer. To get to know Rosa better, he decided to strike up a conversation with his wife about her mother. "Listen, I have an unmarried friend. Why don't I introduce him to Rosa? She's not too bad. She could start a family," Matthew suggested. "You don't know Rosa very well," Jennifer replied. "My mother is a man-hater or a feminist. She believes a man has to earn her love. And she used to say that love doesn't exist, it's a fantasy." Matthew would never have thought that about Rose. On the contrary, she seemed a passionate, sensual woman who respected men. That evening, Matthew received a phone call from Rosa. She missed him and wanted to see him. Matthew looked back at Jennifer, who had laid down after dinner. Because of her indisposition, the medication had not helped much. The girl was lying on her back, head turned to the right. She looked so sweet and defenseless. Matthew suddenly felt a strong twinge of remorse. But Rose was waiting on the other end, and he said he would come over. When Matthew walked in, Rosa's belly was already visible. Had it really been that long? He wondered. "Honey? It's different for everyone. I think we're having a boy," she said, kissing him on the lips. Matthew looked at Rose differently now, remembering Ben's words. Rosa offered dinner and started talking about marriage again, saying she had to hurry. She didn't want to get married with a big belly, but to be slim and beautiful. While she was talking about marriage, Matthew was desperately trying to figure out how to fix the situation. Rose didn't seem to notice his detachment. "Which dress should I wear, the gold or the beige?" she asked, showing him a wedding magazine. Matthew shrugged and poked at the last one at random. He was looking at a woman who didn't care about the feelings of others, like his own mother. After all, she hadn't thought about what it would be like for her daughter. Rose could sense that Matthew was hesitating to make a final choice. She didn't like that, and it made her jealous of him. "Matthew, I've already decided everything, so tomorrow we're going to the registry office with you and apply, because to procrastinate further is to further drown in lies." She was saying all the right things. Matthew agreed with her, but he couldn't imagine what it would all look like at all. He felt a tremendous sense of guilt in front of Rosa, of duty, because now they would have a child. In the end, Matthew decided that it would be better if he and Rosa got married and lived together. And he'd explained to Jennifer that it was just the way it was. That's what he was, an unprincipled fool. He thought he'd tell her that if she didn't forgive him, he'd understand, and that she was entitled to it. The next day, Matthew and Rose headed for the registry office. They decided to sign first, and then, when Jennifer found out about everything, they would play the wedding. Both of them were a little worried, but in the end, everything went smoothly. Rose wanted to celebrate the event and therefore went to a cafe. Next to the wedding palace was a pretty good cafe with a very interesting interior. There were wide armchairs of dark blue color, and each table was separated by a dense curtain, which served as a kind of noise insulation, absorbing sounds. They ordered hot dishes and green tea with lemon and sugar. Rose showed that she was happy with her new status. Matthew tried to look friendly and didn't show that he was still in shock at what he had gotten himself into. Meanwhile, Jennifer had been to the doctor, She was feeling much better. However, the doctor recommended that she diet and not skip meals, so that her body would have the strength to fight, so that she would have a strong immune system. But since she was already hungry, she went to the nearest cafe, which was near the wedding palace. She remembered that she and Matthew had wanted to come here every time, but still hadn't gotten around to it. And this place was quite nice. Jennifer didn't stand for long. She picked a corner for herself and seated herself at the first table where her gaze fell. She ordered her favorite sautéed mushrooms, a salad, and a brownie. She took the first course and already sent several spoonfuls of broth into her mouth. But then she heard what she thought was a familiar voice. At first she didn't pay attention, but then she heard another voice, this time belonging to a man, and as she could guess, to her husband. It was her husband and her mother talking. At first she thought it was just a coincidence. Perhaps the intoxication had already caused her to hallucinate. She even laughed to herself about it. Yes, her brain had independently determined pretty quickly who they belonged to. Logically, however, it didn't fit in Jennifer's head. At first she thought they were talking about the house. She wanted to get up and walk over to them, but stopped when she heard it. I can imagine her surprise when she finds out that you and I are getting married soon, and you're pregnant too. Jennifer froze in shock. She couldn't believe what she was hearing, and it made her turn into one big ear. Becoming invisible, she carefully pulled back the curtains and actually saw Matthew and his mother. They were holding hands and looking at each other like two lovebirds. Jennifer couldn't listen to this any further. She couldn't stand it any longer and walked over to them and asked what it was all about. Matthew was a little frightened. Rose, on the other hand, felt empowered and superior. She looked at her daughter contemptuously. "Why are you so surprised?" Bold, brazen, she asked. "But you are my mother, and this is my husband," exclaimed the wife, shifting her gaze from one to the other. "A double betrayal. No, it can't be." And then Rosa decided not to be silent any longer. "I have devoted my whole life to my daughter and completely forgot about myself. Don't I have the right to love?" she asked, staring at her daughter as if she were a victim of circumstances. The daughter had nothing to add. She was especially disgusted that Matthew was not going to comfort her or justify himself. The girl's eyes filled with tears. She stared into her husband's eyes for a few seconds and then turned around and walked out of the cafe. Matthew wanted to run after her, but Rose stopped him. There was no need to do that. "It's time to get things straight," she said. In the meantime, Jennifer returned to Matthew's apartment, where she was living as his wife. She didn't want to stay here any longer and continue drowning in lies. She packed up her things and left for her best friend's house. It was not easy to bear such a blow from both sides. The girl suffered, cried, and felt incredible heartache. Matthew had already finished the house, and he and Rosa were going to go there to spend the weekend. Rosa's belly had grown considerably. There was nothing to hide it now. She wore maternity pants and a wide coffee-colored sweater. Matthew was also looking for clothes that suited him. He couldn't find his favorite sweatshirt. Going through all the closets, he suddenly came across a strange foam sweatshirt, a new uniform. He twirled it around until he put it on his stomach and realized it was a belly pad. Matthew stood in front of the mirror, trying to figure out how the thing had ended up in the apartment and why it was even needed. The next moment, Rosa entered the room. "Why are you going through my things?" she asked, having accused him of impudence. "Don't you want to tell me what it is?" he asked, although he had already guessed everything. Rose began to frantically think of explanations to justify herself and not be exposed. But Matthew was so shocked by the devious woman's shenanigans that he demanded that she tell him immediately. The same woman, remaining in her repertoire, began to accuse him of disrespecting her as the mother of his future child. Matthew could not stand it, approached her, and tried to take off her clothes by force. A real struggle ensued. Matthew and Rosa collapsed on the bed. The guy literally undressed Rosa, pulling off her sweater and leggings. She was screaming, telling him not to touch her stomach, that she would call the police. Suddenly, one button flew off to the side, and then a second and a third. And the next moment in Matthew's hand was a false belly almost the same as the one he had measured before, only a little smaller. He couldn't hide his amazement at how believable she was. A real uproar broke out in the room. Matthew couldn't believe that he could have been so deceived. "I'm leaving. I won't tolerate deception," he said. "You're a real destroyer. You don't care about the feelings of the people you care about. If that's the case, you're on your own. Grab your bag and go. You're not getting anything anyway." "Why?" she threw, as if she had assumed such an outcome and was sure that he would not find anything and would not dare to take this step. But her hopes were in vain, and so Matthew left her alone. Rose, having finally gotten rid of her belly, continued to live her life as before. She wasn't going to reconcile with her daughter just yet. Perhaps pride wouldn't allow it. But soon a notice arrived in her name that she had to leave the apartment. The mother was horrified. She didn't understand why she had to leave her home, where she had lived for many years. Gathering herself, she went to the notary. An elderly man in an expensive jacket and white shirt helped her understand, scrutinizing everything. He told Rosa that when Matthew was married to her daughter, she had signed the apartment over to him, and when he married her mother, he had registered the house for himself. "But that's impossible. I've been cheated," screamed Rosa, trying to get justice. But the notary said that all questions now to her daughter. Rosa decided not to tell her directly at first, but to pretend that it was Matthew who had abandoned her. When she came to her daughter, who was staying with a friend, she started crying, telling her that Matthew had abandoned her. She had lost her baby because of the stress. He was ruthless and heartless. Jennifer, arms crossed, listened to her, standing in the hallway. Rose sat back in her chair. Her lips were pressed together in indignation. She tried diligently to squeeze out a tear to relieve her daughter. But Jennifer had grown up and understood a lot. You could say she was convinced that her mother was a narcissist and a cynic. Pulling an empty bottle from her pocket with the name of the poison on it, Jennifer tossed it to her mother. She found the poison when she was packing. Her daughter decided not to feel sorry for her and told her the truth. "I always knew you didn't love your father. I knew you cheated on him, and I saw him suffer. You wanted him out of the apartment, and you were the reason he was gone." Jennifer blurted out the horrible truth to her mother. No, that's not true," Rosa denied with trembling lips, clutching the empty bottle in her fist. But looking into her daughter's eyes, she realized that her next lie would not go away. The whole point was that the mother was from a simple family. When she was young, she was very beautiful, and when she dated a guy, she was sure she could find a better option. She had to marry Jason when she found out she was pregnant. Rosa never liked him and wanted to get rid of him. It also weighed on her that she couldn't go back to her old life because she had a young daughter to take care of, love, and raise. She was too strong. Sadness enveloped her at the thought that her life was over. After all, her husband was an average man with an average salary on which one could only go on vacation if one saved for a very long time. Eventually, all of this, including her husband, became unbearably hard to tolerate, and at one point she decided to get rid of him. At night, Jason would have choking attacks. There were times when Rosa would purposely cause them so that he would come to his senses. One night, Jason was short of breath again. Rose woke up. A dog named Mike also woke up. He came into little Jennifer's room and started whining. The girl opened her eyes and thought the dog was thirsty. She got out of bed and walked down the hallway. As she passed her parents' room, she saw that they were awake too. She decided to look in on them. But as soon as her head poked through the half-open door, little Jennifer froze in place. With her own eyes, she saw her mother smothering her father with a pillow in cold blood and without pity. The girl's eyes filled with horror. She was so frightened by what she saw that she preferred to remain unnoticed and quietly returned to the room. At first, she thought she had misunderstood. But when her mother told her the next morning that her father had died, she realized that her eyes had not deceived her that night. The child resolved never to tell anyone about it, ever. The daughter lived with this and could not understand her mother in any way. But because she loved her own father very much, she wished to avenge him. And when she met Matthew, she had a plan. With his help, she was able to take all of her mother's possessions and leave her penniless. Now that her mother had found out that Jennifer had known all these years who had killed her father, she was seriously scared for her life. Without making a noise, she rose from her chair and walked out the door. From then on, mother and daughter never saw each other again. Matthew and Jennifer, on the other hand, were reunited. That's how things in life even fall into place over time. "Honey, I put our house in my mom's name. It's better that way." Amber was numb to her husband's words. Jeremy was raised by his mother alone. They lived in a small studio apartment. His mother worked 2 jobs, providing her son with everything he needed. Life's hardships hardened her. Rose made her a strong-willed woman, which sometimes made her demanding of her son. Jeremy often imagined his father and dreamed of meeting him. At school, when other children were taken away by their parents, the boy silently imagined that one day his father would come for him. But time passed, and his father never showed up. One evening at dinner, the son asked, "Mom, can I ask you a question?" Sure, Jeremy, for some reason, she always avoided talking about his father. Rose frowned, then said, "Because it's very painful for me to remember everything." "I understand, but I'm 16 years old now. I'd like to meet him." "Why did he leave?" Jeremy asked. Rose sighed heavily. Her gaze softened a little. "Son, he left when he found out I was pregnant. He wasn't ready to take responsibility then. It was his decision." "Don't you want to find him now? Maybe he's changed?" Jeremy asked with hope in his voice. His mother shook her head. "Jeremy, I don't know where he lives or with whom. I don't want to know. I let him go a long time ago," she added with a deep sigh. "Jeremy, I realize that you miss your father very much. But believe me, 16 years ago I couldn't change anything. I did everything in my power for you." "Mom, I know. Thank you for everything," he said gratefully. "Jeremy, please, let's never talk about your father again," Rose said sharply. The son nodded affirmatively, but inside him was a misunderstanding of his father's behavior. How could you just walk away from a woman who was expecting a child from you? "I would never do that," Jeremy told himself. Years passed. Jeremy had always been interested in psychology and human relationships. He graduated from university and majored in psychology, despite the fact that his mother was strongly opposed to this profession. Having received the long-awaited diploma, Jeremy began his career as a psychologist in a private kindergarten. Later, he moved to work in a school, and at the same time rented an office and received clients as an individual psychologist. Jeremy loved his work very much. He listened attentively to every person who came to him for help. They were people with different problems. Some suffered from depression, some were going through a difficult divorce, and some just couldn't find themselves in life. Jeremy found an individual approach to each client, helped to understand the situation, and found a solution. His compassion and skill were paying off. Each month the number of clients grew. Jeremy barely had time to sign up everyone, but he was happy about it. When he helped people, he was overflowing with sincere joy, which gave him even more strength and inspiration. That's how he became a famous psychologist. After several years of hard work, Jeremy was able to build himself a studio apartment, a studio in the city center, and renovate his mother's apartment. He was very glad that he did not succumb to her influence and still chose the profession he had his heart set on. Of course, he loved his mother very much, pitying her and helping her, but he was often tired of her rigidity and hardness. Jeremy realized that perhaps if her father had not abandoned her when she was young and she had had support, she would have been much softer and more feminine. As time went on, Jeremy already had an apartment, a car, a job he loved, but he had no personal life. When he'd visit his mother, she'd always bring up the same subject. "Son, men your age already have children. But you don't only have children, you don't even have a girlfriend. You have so many women coming to see you. Can't you get acquainted with anyone?" Rosa asked. "We get a lot of women," Jeremy replied. "But they come to get my psychological help. I don't see them as partners for life." Rose pressed her lips together and shook her head. "What about you, Jeremy?" she said sternly. "Let's not talk about that. I'm sick of the same old stuff. Mom, I just want grandchildren, you know. I'm not young anymore." "I understand, Mom, but I don't want to get married just for show. Starting a family is a big step, at least for me." Jeremy had never lacked for female attention, but he was in no hurry to get married. Some female clients tried to get close to him, but he delicately made it clear that there could be no other options besides a working relationship. A year passed. Jeremy was completely absorbed in his work. In addition to individual counseling, he began to conduct psychological trainings. People signed up months in advance. One day on his day off, Jeremy came to visit his mom. "How are you doing?" Rosa asked him as soon as they sat down to dinner. "You don't come to see me much anymore." "Mom, I have a lot of work. I am now also conducting trainings." "Wow," Mom was surprised. "I am proud of you. But work is work, but you have to build a family?" "Mom, you again?" Jeremy said sharply. "Jeremy, but you wouldn't understand. The older you get, the harder it is for you to choose a woman. I mean, you're in training now. You've got tons of people coming to see you. But don't you like any woman?" Jeremy smiled, hugged his mom, and said, "Mom, you do not understand that for people who come to me for counseling and training, I must first of all be a professional." Rosa looked intently at her son and asked, "Or maybe you don't want to get married at all?" "Mom, I really want to create a strong, harmonious, holistic family. I want to get married once and for all. But I guess everything has its time. Maybe someday I'll meet the right one, but for now I'm focused on work." Rose shrugged silently. But Jeremy knew that the next time his mother would bring it up again. One day, a girl named Amber came to Jeremy for individual counseling. She timidly sat down in the chair and began to tell her sad story. A few years ago, Amber met a man on the internet. At first, everything was fine, a candy bouquet, period. Love, plans for a joint future. But life made its adjustments. Amber got pregnant and shared the happy news with her man. But this news turned out to be happy only for her, because the man said that he did not want to be a father, as children are a burden. So they broke up without getting married. Amber, despite all the difficulties of life, carried and gave birth to a daughter. 2 years had passed, and she still remembered the situation, still thinking about that man from time to time and blaming herself for the fact that maybe she was wrong about something, since he had done that to her. She tormented herself with questions. Why did this happen? What did she do wrong? Why didn't he want to stay with her and their child? After all, everything had been fine before he found out about the pregnancy. It's amazing how similar Amber's life situations are to my mom's. My dad, when he found out she was pregnant, left her alone with a baby in her arms, too, Jeremy thought to himself, and his heart squeezed with pain and sympathy for Amber. When Amber stopped talking, Jeremy suddenly took her hand and said quietly, "Amber, I understand your pain and your bitterness, but you are not to blame for what happened. On the contrary, you are good that, despite the difficulties in the situation, you carried and gave birth to a child. That takes a lot of courage. Children are wonderful." Jeremy paused for a few seconds and then added, "Amber, you must realize that every person in the world has their own challenges, lessons that were not learned in previous incarnations. This means that there will be conditions for new attempts to realize and pass these life lessons. And how a person copes with these tasks is already shown by life itself. Some people look for the reasons for their failures, for the culprits, complain about the circumstances around them, complain and change absolutely nothing. Others find their own points for development. There are such lessons in me, in you, in every human being, and in your former man with whom you broke up." Amber listened attentively, feeling her heart gradually fill with warmth and calm. And Jeremy continued, "Amber, in everyone's life there are different people, good and evil, sincere and conniving, all simplistic and vindictive, wise and reckless. Some become part of our soul, others remain mere acquaintances, but everyone we meet on our path brings something unique to life experience, which is formed and needed for the development of our soul, for the realization of life lessons that have not been passed by us before. And sometimes you have to live a particular experience only to finally realize that it's yours and for you, or not about you and not for you." Amber finally broke the silence. "Jeremy, thank you so much for your understanding and for your support. It's like a stone has fallen from my soul." Jeremy smiled. He saw tears of relief and joy in Amber's eyes. And to him, that was the most important thing. "Amber, even though your relationship with this man didn't work out, doesn't having a daughter make you happy?" Jeremy asked. Amber smiled with tears in her eyes and said, "It sure does." As the counseling session came to an end, Amber no longer looked as panicked as she had at the beginning. "Jeremy, you've helped me a lot. Thank you so much." "Always at your service," Jeremy said and smiled. They said their goodbyes and Amber left. Jeremy, on the other hand, stayed in his office waiting for his next client. Several weeks passed. Jeremy was immersed in work as usual. His daily schedule was packed to the minute: consultations, trainings, documents. He barely had time to stop and catch his breath. Despite his busyness, Jeremy began to notice that his thoughts occasionally returned to Amber, the girl who came to him for individual counseling. Jeremy was surprised by her sincerity and her touching simplicity. Unlike many other clients, she came without makeup, which made her even more attractive. Jeremy recalled their conversation, her life story, connected with her ex-husband, her worries, how she listened attentively to his advice. In her eyes there was a special sincere gratitude for support and understanding. And her tears touched Jeremy to the core. "And Jeremy, this is your client? What do you think you're doing?" he muttered to himself with a smile. He knew it was important to respect professional boundaries, but he was taken aback. After all, for the first time he saw his client not just as someone who needed help, but as a woman. Every time he thought of Amber, he felt warm at heart, realizing that his feelings went beyond professional interest. That realization both scared and inspired him at the same time. And a couple of times he'd even thought about texting or calling her, since her phone number was in his client database. But in the end, he decided that would be unprofessional and inappropriate. 2 months passed. Jeremy was preparing for an upcoming psychological training session aimed at developing effective communication skills. This training was scheduled to take place in a week, and it was important to him that everything went perfectly. He designed a variety of exercises and interactive exercises to keep the participants as immersed in the training as possible. On the day of the training, Jeremy arrived at his classroom 40 minutes early to set up. He arranged the chairs, laid out the handouts. After about 20 minutes, the training participants began to arrive, filling the room with a light buzz of conversation. Jeremy was talking to a woman named Rose, who often attended his trainings. When the door opened again, he turned and froze for a moment. Standing in the doorway was Amber, the same girl who had been on his mind for months. He couldn't believe his eyes. Amber stood on the threshold, looking around and clearly expecting someone. Jeremy had finished talking to one of his customers. He wanted to approach Amber, but at that moment a guy entered the auditorium and smiled at Amber. The two of them headed toward the empty seats together. Jeremy realized that he was the one Amber was waiting for as she looked around. "I wonder who he is to her," Jeremy thought to himself. Amber and her boyfriend sat down in the empty seats and began to talk passionately. Jeremy got his thoughts together and began to review the material he was going to present to the participants. Several people had not yet arrived, and everyone was waiting for their arrival. Suddenly, Jeremy met Amber's gaze. She smiled, stood up abruptly, and walked over to him. "Hello, Jeremy," Amber said. "I wasn't expecting to see you. A coworker signed me up. I didn't know you'd be leading the training." "Hello, Amber. Good to see you. Yes, I also do trainings," he said with a smile. "I didn't know that. By the way, Jeremy, I want to thank you again. After individual counseling with you, I felt much calmer. It's like you've changed the way I think," Amber said. Jeremy couldn't hide his joy at hearing that, and replied, "I'm so glad I was able to help you. It's the best reward for my work." Amber smiled again, then said, "This is going to be such an interesting topic in the training today. I decided that I could use some effective communication skills." Yes, the topic is interesting and important, because we are all in society and communicate with people every day. So let's learn how to do that effectively, Jeremy said. He looked into Amber's eyes and then added, "We'll start soon enough." Amber headed to her seat and sat down next to her coworker. It's amazing how sometimes life itself finds a way to bring people together. She's amazing. She has a special energy, Jeremy thought to himself. The training began. Jeremy watched with interest as Amber actively participated in the discussions and exercises, much to his delight as the participants took notes on what they had learned. Jeremy caught himself thinking that his gaze was fixed on Amber. Her natural beauty, her sincere, unadorned smile, her ease of movement. Jeremy continued to silently compliment Amber. From time to time, he and she met eyes. They seemed to be engaged in a silent dialogue that only they could understand. Jeremy realized that this girl aroused awe and admiration in him. After the training, people began to leave, discussing what they had learned, and some came up to Jeremy and asked questions. Amber came up to him. "Jeremy, thank you for the information and practical knowledge of communications and for putting so much energy into your work. Today was incredibly helpful and interesting," she said. Jeremy smiled and said, "Amber, you have said so many nice things to me, even though it's just my job. I really enjoy what I do for people. You, on the other hand, are doing a great job. I watched you today, how actively you participated in everything, and how quickly you mastered everything. I have never attended trainings and had no idea how exciting, and most importantly, informative it is. I will definitely come again," said Amber. "I'm glad you enjoyed it," Jeremy said. "Sure, come back, I'd be glad to." He was tempted to say to Amber, maybe we could get together outside of training and have dinner sometime. But he knew how important it was to stick to professional boundaries. So with all his willpower in his fist, he just smiled. When he got home, he kept thinking about the training and about Amber, hoping that he would meet her again. And his hopes were realized. A month later, she came to the training again, which he was very happy about. After the class ended, as people began to leave, Jeremy noticed that Amber was the last to leave. Taking advantage of the moment, he called out to her. "Amber." She turned around. Jeremy smiled and said, "Did you understand everything in the training today?" "Yes, more than enough," Amber replied. Amber replied, "You always have such a comfortable and easily accessible way of presenting the material. I try to keep it that way," Jeremy said, and looked at Amber and asked, "Do you have any free time right now?" "Yes," she replied. "How would you feel about having a cup of coffee or tea right now? There's a cozy cafe nearby with delicious pastries." "An unexpected question," Jeremy said. She looked a little embarrassed, then said timidly, "I have an hour to spare. Then I have to pick up my daughter from daycare." "Great. You and I can eat all the baked goods in an hour," Jeremy said and laughed. Amber smiled as well. 10 minutes later, they were already sitting in the cozy cafe. They ordered a cup of coffee and a portion of pastries. Jeremy sensed that Amber was a little nervous in his presence and tried to use his professional psychological knowledge to help her relax and feel comfortable. He tried to make occasional gentle jokes to lighten the mood, asking Amber about her hobbies, about her daughter. They didn't even notice how over an hour had passed. Amber looked at her watch, eyes widened in surprise, and stood up abruptly. "Oh, something, I've been sitting up late. I have to go, or Emily is waiting at daycare. It's starting to snow outside." "It's probably going to be crowded for the bus now," Amber said worriedly. "Amber, don't worry, I have my car. I'll give you a ride to the daycare right now," Jeremy said. "Really?" Amber interjected. "Of course." "Oh, thank you so much," she rejoiced. Jeremy smiled to himself and thought, how funny she is. Even though she has a daughter, she looks like a kid herself. As they pulled up to the daycare center, the snowfall intensified. "Amber, do you live far away?" Jeremy asked. "Well, there are 3 more bus stops to go. How about I give you and your daughter a ride home?" "Where would you go in this weather?" Jeremy suggested. "Oh, Jeremy, I've already kept you late. They must be waiting for you at home." "No, I'm in no hurry. And the only thing waiting for me at home is my parrot. I'll give you a ride," Jeremy said firmly. Amber looked at him with a smile and said thank you so much. She walked into the daycare center to pick up her daughter. When the little girl got in the car, she immediately said, "Hi. My name is Emily. What's yours?" "And I'm Jeremy. Nice to meet you." "Is this your car?" Emily asked. "Yeah, I'm about to drive you and your mom home in it." "That's good, because my mom and I were running late today, and I didn't have time to put my boots on," said Emily. Amber and Jeremy laughed. When Jeremy stopped the car in the driveway, the girl asked, "Will you come over and visit us? I'll show you my toys." "Daughter," Amber intervened, "Uncle Jeremy has to go home. He had a hard day at work." Emily frowned, looked at Jeremy, then at Amber and said, "Mom, we have delicious pie at home. Maybe now Jeremy wants to eat some." Amber was confused and looked at Jeremy and said, "Jeremy, just get this right. How would you feel about coming over for tea and cake?" "For tea and cake," Jeremy interjected. He was, of course, very glad to be invited, for it was another opportunity to socialize with Amber. The little girl put her hand on Jeremy's shoulder and said, "Come on over to our place. Look at the snow outside." Jeremy smiled. "Well, how can you say no to such lovely ladies?" "Yay!" Emily shouted as she entered Amber's apartment. Jeremy noted that the apartment, though small, was very cozy. The interior was especially charming with candles and creative figurines placed everywhere. "Amber, it's very cozy," Jeremy said and took one of the candles in his hands. The girl noticed Jeremy examining the candle and said, "These candles my mom makes herself." "Really?" "Very pretty and fragrant." "Amber, your creative," marveled Jeremy. "Thank you," Jeremy said Amber modestly. "I love making something with my hands." At the table, everyone was chatting animatedly, laughing. Jeremy felt like he had known Amber for a long time. Jeremy felt easy and comfortable in the company of Amber and her daughter Emily. He noticed that little Emily lacked a man's care and support. As he was about to leave, he sat down next to Emily and said, "Thank you and your mom for the invitation and the delicious pie. Will you be coming to visit us again?" Emily suddenly asked. Jeremy answered without thinking, "You know, I'd rather invite you and your mom to an amusement park. Would you like that?" What Emily did next surprised both Amber and Jeremy. The girl put her arms around his neck and said, "You are so kind and good. I really wish I had a daddy like that." Amber intervened. "Uncle Jeremy, it's probably time to go now. We've already kept him busy." Jeremy looked at the girl and said, "I really should go home, but we'll definitely go to the park together." Amber added, embarrassed, "Jeremy, you don't have to invite us out. You have enough to do." "It's okay. Work's not going anywhere," he said with a smile. Jeremy began to gently and carefully court Amber and her daughter Emily. He tried not to impose and listened to them carefully. At first, their meetings were infrequent and brief. Sometimes they would just walk in the park talking about life or go to the movies together. As time went on, Jeremy and Amber began to socialize more often. Unnoticeably, they began to correspond daily, sharing their thoughts, experiences, and dreams. They understood each other half-heartedly and supported each other in everything. Their relationship developed rapidly. One of the first significant events was a joint weekend trip. Jeremy proposed to go to the estate, where they could relax from the bustle of the city. It was the first time they spent so much time together. The girl was delighted with nature, the small zoo on the estate, and new experiences. And Amber enjoyed the tranquility in Jeremy's company. This weekend was the beginning of a new phase in their lives. Jeremy realized that he couldn't live a day without Amber. She had become not just a woman he had feelings for, but a true friend. And the little girl with her endless energy and childlike spontaneity became for him just like his own. One day, Jeremy arrived at his mom's house. "Son, you came to me less and less often. Has something changed?" she asked, scrutinizing her son. Jeremy smiled and nodded. "I found the one. I am happy with her." Rose hugged her son and said in a firm voice, "Finally, I thought you would never meet anyone. I am very happy for you." Squinting her eyes, Rosa continued, "So why don't you introduce me to her? Come over to my place for lunch this weekend." "Okay," Jeremy replied, not hiding his smile. "Jeremy, you've blossomed. I don't recognize you," Rose said simply. "I won't argue. You have no idea how much I love her." It was the weekend. Jeremy picked up Amber and they hit the road. On the way, they dropped the girl off at Amber's mom's house. After dropping off the girl, Jeremy and Amber went to the store and bought wine and cake. With the purchases, they headed to Rosa's house. Stopping in the driveway, Amber said, "I'm worried." Jeremy took her hand and calmly said, "Don't worry, everything will be fine. I'm right here with you." The door was opened by a petite woman of short stature. As she entered the apartment, Amber immediately felt the appraising gaze of Jeremy's mom. "Hello," Amber said, remembering what Jeremy had said about his mom being a difficult woman. "Hello," the woman said and looked Amber over from head to toe. "Come on in and make yourself at home." "Mom, I want you to meet Amber." "This is Amber." "Amber, this is my mom," Rose Jeremy said. Everyone sat down at the table. He poured wine for his mom and Amber. The atmosphere was relaxed. They talked about neutral topics: the weather, the upcoming New Year's Eve. Jeremy shared plans about his work, telling what projects he wanted to create and realize before the new year. Suddenly, Jeremy's mom looked at her son and asked, "I hope you will come to me on New Year's Eve?" Jeremy hesitated, then calmly said, "Mom, Amber and I were planning to spend New Year's Eve together." After holding out for a few seconds, he added, "Or rather, the three of us." Rose raised her eyebrows and asked, "The three of us with me?" Jeremy shook his head. "Mom, not exactly a threesome. It's me, Amber, and her daughter." There was silence for a moment. Jeremy's mom glanced shrilly at Amber, then at her son, and then clarified, trying to hide her surprise. "Ah, so Amber has a daughter?" Amber saw Jeremy's mom's face change from what she'd heard. "She's a wonderful girl, kind, smart, funny," Jeremy said. Amber thought, she was so surprised, like she didn't know I had a baby. Didn't Jeremy tell her? A heavy silence hung in the room. But after a few seconds, Jeremy's mom said dryly, "Didn't you tell me Amber had a daughter?" Jeremy shrugged. "Well, I did now." Amber caught a stern look from Rose. "And how old is your daughter, Amber?" she asked through gritted teeth. "Almost 4, Amber replied. "I see," Rose said. "So you've been married then?" Amber shrank back. She didn't want to talk about her past relationship with Emily's father. But Rose stared at Amber, waiting for an answer. "I wasn't married," Amber answered boldly, thinking that she shouldn't lie and should tell the truth about her past. After all, she had nothing to be ashamed of. There was nothing to be ashamed of for having a daughter out of wedlock. The important thing is that Jeremy knows about it and is cool with it. "Mom, who cares if Amber was married or not? It's her past, and why bring it up?" Jeremy tried to talk some sense into his mom, knowing her temper. "Jeremy, I was just asking, what's the big deal?" Rose said. She looked at Amber and took a sip of her juice and added, "Tell me better, how did you two meet?" Jeremy began to talk about how Amber had come for individual counseling, then psychological training with him. Amber felt uncomfortable and wished she could go home soon, back to familiar surroundings. Rosa seemed to realize this and deliberately tried to dig into her past more and more. Whenever Jeremy's mom asked her something, Amber answered briefly. And Jeremy kept telling his mom about the three of them going to the circus, going on weekend trips out of town. Rose was frowning more and more with each passing minute. "Mom, are you feeling okay?" Jeremy asked, noticing her gloomy mood. "I'm fine," she replied sharply and looked at Amber. Amber sensed her dislike and turned to Jeremy and said, "Jeremy, why don't we help your mom put the dishes away and go home already? We have to pick up the girl from her grandmother's." "Don't help me with the dishes," Rosa said sharply. "Are you sure?" Jeremy asked. "Yes, I'm sure." "Come on, I'll walk you out." As Jeremy and Amber were about to leave the apartment, Rosa asked, "Jeremy, do you think you might have a chance to come over tomorrow to help me take out and throw away the old boxes that are on our balcony? I want to clean up the mess." "When are you?" "I'm on my way to pick it up," Jeremy offered. "No," Rosa said. "What do you want to do?" "Well, tomorrow's tomorrow." Amber and Jeremy said goodbye to her mom and went outside. In the car, Amber said, "I think your mom was upset when she heard I had a daughter." "Amber, she needs time," Jeremy replied. The next day, he went back to his mom's house. As promised, she met him on the doorstep with an even more somber look than the day before. "Hey, Mom, where are the boxes that need to be thrown off the balcony?" Jeremy asked. He began to take the boxes out, and Rose watched him silently. Finally, Rose spoke up and said, "Son, I don't want to offend you, but this is Amber. I don't think she's for you. Jeremy stopped. Mom, you asked me to come over to talk about Amber and to help take the boxes out. Mom, why do you think Amber isn't for me? Yeah, because she has a baby, Rosa said. Jeremy's eyes widened in surprise. So what if she has a baby? It doesn't bother me at all. On the contrary, I've grown very attached to the girl, and she to me. And yet, Jeremy, I don't understand why you want a woman with a child. And anyway, she wasn't even married. Do you know who her child is from? I mean, she's been, walking around somewhere. Maybe the man who gave birth to her child is an alcoholic or a drug addict. She's the one who's good while she's little, but what will grow out of her you never know. Jeremy was taken aback by his mother's words. Mom, are you even out of your mind? What are you talking about? You don't know Amber at all and you're slinging mud at her. I thought you'd be happy for me, that I'm finally happy. You've been dreaming of me meeting someone, haven't you? Yes, dreamed of you meeting a woman, but without a child. Look, Mom, take offense or not, but I have no intention of breaking up with Amber for your whim. I love her, and I'm going to marry her whether you like it or not. Rose blushed, then said, how do you talk to your mother? You found yourself some slut who gave birth to who knows who. Jeremy smirked. To be honest, I'm shocked at what you're saying. You'd think you were such a saint, Mom. You never married and raised me alone. You're supposed to understand Amber. Jeremy, this isn't about me right now, it's about you. I want you to be happy. Here you are wanting to marry a woman, raise someone else's child, and you realize that a child is a big responsibility. Mom, you're talking to me like I'm 16 years old. Don't you think you're overprotecting me? No, I don't feel that way, Rose replied calmly. I'm just really worried about you. You're worrying over nothing. That's it. I'm tired of talking about it, and I'm going to ask you to never speak ill of Amber again from now on. This is my future wife. Rose's face changed. Jeremy, noticing the indignation on his mother's face, added, you don't like what I said, Mom. You're going to have to accept it. What Rosa asked defiantly. Accept Amber, and the fact that she and I are getting married. What his mother then said shocked Jeremy. Do what you want, Jeremy, but I'm not coming to your wedding to Amber. Also, my house is always open to you, but not for Amber to set foot in it, much less her baby. I don't know what's gotten into you, Mom. But you're only ruining not only Amber's relationship with me with this act, but with me too. I certainly can't make you love her, but I won't let you insult her either. Jeremy said sternly and, taking a deep breath, added, I've taken all the boxes off the balcony. It's a shame our interactions ended this way. Bye. Bye, Rose replied dryly. Jeremy walked outside in utter confusion. He had never seen his mom so embittered before, and he had absolutely never expected her to be like this. He decided not to tell Amber anything about the conversation with his mom. A week later, he proposed to her and she accepted without a second thought. As they were making the guest list, Jeremy crossed his mom off the list. Why did you do that? Amber asked in surprise. Don't you want your mom to attend our wedding? I don't, Jeremy replied succinctly. But why? She's your mom. Amber. I'm sorry. I don't want to talk about that topic either. My mom and I have our differences. And let's face it, we always have. That's why she won't be at our wedding. Jeremy, how can you do this? It's not normal. What happened between you two? Amber, honey, let's not cloud our relationship with you with all this unnecessary worry and talk. Let's focus on our wedding. Amber shrugged. Of course, she guessed that the disagreement between Jeremy and his mom, Rose, had to do with her. Amber had gotten a good feel for Rose's ill will at their last meeting, but she couldn't imagine how much the woman disliked her. 2 months later, Jeremy and Amber were married and went to live in Jeremy's one-bedroom studio apartment. One evening, they sat in the kitchen discussing their dreams and plans for the future. Little Emily slept quietly. Yes, the apartment is certainly small for all three of us, Jeremy said. But that's it for now, my love. The main thing is that things are good between us. We spend most of our time at work anyway, and we only sleep at home. So the size of the place doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter as long as there are three of us, Amber said, But if we have another baby, there will be 4 of us, and there wouldn't be enough room. Jeremy smiled and continued. I really want a house for our family, so I've decided that I'm going to put money aside every month so that you and I can buy the house of our dreams. Imagine a spacious living room, a kitchen where we could all gather in the evenings. And of course, everyone would have their own room, so that the kids would have more room to play, and they could run and play without bumping into the furniture. That's a wonderful idea, Jeremy Amber said happily. Together we can do anything. By the way, I can sell my studio apartment if we run out of money. No, I don't think we should sell it. The kids will grow up and want to live apart from us. Amber smiled and hugged her husband. What a responsible and caring man he was. I'm behind him like a stone wall, Amber thought to herself, and looked at her husband with love and admiration. As time went on, Jeremy worked very hard. He only had 1 day off during the week. Amber also went to work, at the same time doing household chores, and in her spare time she made candles. Gradually, the relationship between Jeremy and his mom, Rosa, got better. He periodically traveled to her, helped her. It seemed that Rosa, a little resigned to the fact that her son married a woman with a child. After a while, even began to sometimes invite Jeremy with Amber and Emily to visit. She never missed an opportunity to jab or rebuke Amber. Amber always sensed Rosa's latent dislike, but she tried to ignore it for the sake of her family. Whenever Jeremy went to visit his mom, he always came back irritated. Amber suspected that Rosa was trying to manipulate her son to sow discord between them. However, despite her best efforts, Jeremy and Amber continued to live in love and happiness, working and saving money to buy their dream home. Jeremy, as always, was passionate about his work in the field of psychology. People not only from America, but also from Europe came to his individual consultations and trainings. Meanwhile, Amber decided to realize her long-held dream. She rented a small space near her home and turned it into a cozy workshop, where she held workshops where she shared her secrets and techniques for making scented candles. And soon she opened an online store to sell her candles. 2 years passed in hard work. Jeremy and Amber worked tirelessly, putting all their energy and resources into the development of their business. Their efforts were not in vain. They saved enough money to buy a house. It was their shared dream that finally became a reality. Amber was over the moon. She imagined how they would move into a spacious house together and make it beautiful, spend evenings on the veranda, enjoy the peace and tranquility of country life. Jeremy and Amber decided not to put things off, so they went to a real estate agency. The agency manager listened carefully to their wishes and offered several options that met their requirements and budget. Jeremy and Amber looked forward to the weekend to view the proposed homes. On their first weekend off, they went out to look at the homes. Some homes they didn't like right away, others were almost perfect, but there was always some small but significant flaw. Eventually, they came to a cozy spot where a house with a small pond stood. As soon as Amber saw the house, her heart beat faster. It was like a fairy tale. Jeremy, too, immediately sensed that it was exactly what they were looking for. Without wasting any time, they immediately decided that this house should be their new home. The legal and financial arrangements took some time to finalize. Amber lived each day in anticipation of an important, long-awaited event for her family, without even realizing the surprise that lay ahead of her. She ordered boxes for the move and slowly started packing and packing. But a few days passed, and Amber began to notice that Jeremy was coming home in some sort of anxious state. "Honey, are you okay? It's been a long day since you've been moody," she asked. "Yes, I'm fine," Jeremy answered dryly. "But I can see that something is bothering you." "But I told you, I'm fine." "Jeremy, the boxes came today, so I've already started packing." Jeremy looked at the boxes and didn't say anything. Then his phone rang and he went out onto the balcony, closing the door behind him. That's odd. He never closed himself off on the balcony to talk. Probably definitely some problem at work. He just doesn't want to tell me so he won't bother me, Amber thought to herself. Over the next few days, Jeremy didn't seem to be himself. Amber tried not to ask him any questions at first, just silently put dinner in front of him, and went to play with Emily. But as time went on and her husband's mood didn't change, Amber decided to talk to him and find out what was going on with the deed to the house. Amber waited for her husband to come home from work, and when he showered and walked into the kitchen with a stern look, she asked him, "Jeremy, how was your work day?" "Great." "Bait. Why aren't you in the mood?" "I'm not in the mood." "Darling, I wanted to ask you how the paperwork for the house is going. When are we going to move in?" Noticing the change in her husband's face, she added, "Is something wrong?" "With the deeds?" "Yes, everything is fine. All the legal and financial issues have been resolved. I put the house in my mom's name. It's better for her, and for me," Jeremy said calmly to Amber and put the file in front of her. "I wanted to talk to you about this today." Amber was stunned. "Are you out of your mind?" she exclaimed. "You put the house in Mom's name? It's what's best for her and what's best for you. Do you realize what you've done?" Amber felt like she was dreaming. "Oh, come on. It's just a formality. We're still going to be living in this house later." "Jeremy, I don't know how you could do this to me," Amber asked in a shaky voice. "I don't see anything wrong with it. Who cares who the house is registered to?" Amber was angrier than ever. "Jeremy, I just don't understand why you would put our house in your mom's name. What does she have to do with it? I mean, you and I worked so hard for 2 years to buy our dream house. And you just signed it over to your mom. Why didn't you discuss this with me? I'm your wife." "Look, stop talking to me like that. I don't know what you're so angry about. What's the big deal about the house being in Mom's name? Are we going to live there?" "What's the big deal?" Amber asked aggressively. "It's that your mom hated me from the first day we met, and she didn't even hide it. And every time we met, she tried to give him a jab to show her dislike for him. She openly demonstrated that she was unhappy that he married a woman with a child. Don't tell me that's not true. But why did it happen? I'm not going to argue. But things are better now. She's made concessions and invited them all over to her house. And you're thanking her for that and putting the house in her name?" Amber asked wryly. "Amber, stop talking about my mom like that." "She doesn't deserve it," Jeremy said. "You know she had a lot of struggles when she was young. She raised me alone, worked 2 jobs just so I wouldn't need anything. Yeah, she was always bossy and tough. But despite that, I am very grateful for the care and love she gave me." Amber couldn't calm down. "Jeremy, I know what it's like to be alone with a baby. So don't tell me about it," she added with tears in her eyes. "This whole thing with the house is really weird. You and I went to this goal for so long, saved money, found a house. We were over the moon. I packed my bags, and now I'm not happy about it at all. And the thing that pisses me off the most is that you didn't even consult me." Jeremy softened a little and said, "Honey, but nothing has changed. We planned to live in the house of our dreams, and we're still going to live in it. Does it bother you that much that I put the house in Mom's name?" "Of course it bothers me," Amber said firmly. "I can see some hidden meaning behind it." "But what hidden meaning could there be? When I told my mom that you and I had saved up enough money to buy a house, she was surprised and happy. And a few days later, she got sick. By the way, that's why I came home so gloomy. But I didn't say anything to you, so as not to bother you unnecessarily. One day I went to her house to bring her some groceries. She said to me, 'I'm very happy that you'll live in a country house. It's just a pity that it's so far away from me, because I'm not young anymore.' And I felt very sorry for her then. Lying there, a companion with a look. For some reason at that moment I remembered some moments of my childhood and my mother, how she came from work tired in the evenings. He sighed heavily and added, and to cheer her up, I told her that the house was registered to her. So I put it in her name. So Amber, it's just a formality, and there's no hidden agenda." "But why didn't you consult me?" Amber asked. "I always thought that in a family you should discuss everything with each other." "Honey, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I'll always consult with you from now on," Jeremy said and hugged Amber. "Jeremy, I don't trust your mom after all the things she's said about me. But I don't want to fight with you. So please, let's always consult with you when we make any decisions." "Okay," Jeremy said. When they went to bed, Amber was still thinking about the house and her mother-in-law. She couldn't sleep. When she woke up in the morning, she made breakfast for her husband and asked him to take the baby to daycare on the way. After waving to them from the window, Amber had a quick breakfast, grabbed all the deeds to the house her husband had given her the day before, and went to the lawyer's office to find out all her rights regarding the house she had purchased. In the lawyer's office, Amber, barely holding back tears, laid the papers out on the table and began to tell the whole story. The lawyer, an elderly man with gray hair and a kind face, listened carefully, looked at all the documents and said, "Amber, I understand your feelings, but let's look at the situation calmly. Legally, everything is in order. It says here in black and white that the house is now registered to your mother-in-law, Rosa. But she has nothing to do with the house. My husband and I saved up all the money to buy it. Rosa didn't invest a penny." "Is there any way to remortgage it?" Amber asked. "Rosa owns the house. It would be hard to change anything without her consent. But if Rosa agrees, you can sign over the deed to yourself or your husband. There's no other way." Amber took a deep breath, thanked the lawyer, and left the office. She was shaking with injustice. For 2 years, my wife and I had set aside a decent amount of money each month. We'd picked out a house, and Jeremy had just signed it over to his mom, who hated me. "No, I'm not going to let this go," Amber thought to herself as she walked slowly to her car. Amber decided to drive over to Rosa's house and find out. Her heart was racing and her hands were shaking, but she knew she had to figure this situation out. When Rosa opened the door and saw Amber, her face changed. "Are you surprised? Is something wrong?" she asked. "I need to talk to you," Amber replied dryly. "But come on in since you're here." Amber walked into the apartment and immediately said, "Rosa, I want to understand why Jeremy signed our new house over to you." Rosa grinned. "Because it's what's best for all of us. Jeremy should be thinking about his family, not some woman with a baby." Amber tried to contain her anger. "I'm Jeremy's official wife. The house was bought with our money, and you had no part in it." "I wasn't, but as you can see, I'm the owner and Jeremy is my son. And I know what's best for him," Rose said wryly. Amber realized that talking to Rosa was useless. "I'm not just going to let this go," Amber said, and turned and walked out of the apartment. When Amber told her husband about what Rosa had said, Jeremy just shrugged. "Sweetheart, I beg you, don't pay any attention to what she said. Let's enjoy our quiet family happiness." 2 weeks passed. Amber, Jeremy, and Emily moved into the house. Amber had mixed feelings about the move. On the one hand, she was excited to live in a country house, but on the other hand, the thought of Rosa owning the house made her very sad. She tried to distract herself from the intrusive negative thoughts by concentrating on improving the house. Every weekend, Jeremy and Amber went to garden and building stores, buying something beautiful and needed for the house and garden. 2 months passed, and a cloud loomed over their family. It was a normal weekday. Jeremy was at work, Emily at daycare. Amber was tending to the vegetable garden when she heard the sound of a car pulling up to the gate. It must be the neighbors, Amber thought. But just a few seconds later, she heard it. "Hello, Amber. I hope I haven't distracted you too much." Turning around, Amber was dumbfounded. Standing in front of her was Rose. "Hello, not too distracted." "I'm planting flowers," Amber said calmly. "Good. You could wipe your hands off the ground and bring my suitcases to my house. There's a cab driver waiting," Rosa said firmly. Amber almost fainted at what she heard. What kind of insolence was that? Wipe your hands. My house. We'll drop off the suitcases. Did Rosa get up on the wrong side of the bed today? She thought to herself. Amber froze, and Rosa added, "Amber, what are you standing there for?" "I told you there's a cab driver waiting. Get my suitcases out of the trunk." Barely able to keep from insulting her, Amber went to get the suitcases. A storm was raging inside her. When she got the suitcases into the house, she asked, "Rosa, what was the reason for your unexpected arrival?" "What's what, Amber?" I'm Jeremy's mom. This house is mine, so I decided to live here while my apartment was being remodeled. Amber felt her heart race. She hadn't expected this and didn't know how to react. But Jeremy and I hadn't discussed it. Did he know you were coming? Amber asked, trying to remain calm. I'd told him a long time ago that I wanted to renovate my apartment, but I hadn't told him I was coming. But I came to my house, so I'm sure Jeremy would be happy to see me. Amber picked up her phone and told her mother-in-law, I'm going to step away. I need to make a phone call. Dialing her husband and hearing his voice, Amber said in a trembling voice, Jeremy, hi. Your mom's here. She says she's coming to live with us. Did you know about this? No, I didn't, Jeremy replied calmly. You should have heard what she was saying to me. I don't want to live in the same house with her. Honey, I'll be there soon and we'll talk about it. Just don't worry. Amber hung up the phone, went back into the living room. She was surprised to find her mother-in-law not there. I'm in the kitchen making tea. Amber heard Rose's voice from the kitchen. She was in a hurry. Not only had she arrived unannounced, brought her suitcases, declared that she was going to live here, but she walked around the kitchen as if she were at home. The landlady's feeling herself, Amber thought. Rose, would you ask where the tea is? Instead of going through the cupboards. Oh, come on, Amber. I'm sure I can find the tea myself. Jeremy's going to be here soon to talk about it. What are we going to discuss? My mother-in-law asked in surprise. Do you want to live in this house? Amber, that's not even up for discussion. It's a fact of life. Get used to me living here. Amber gritted her teeth and tried to calm down. She realized there was no point in conflict right now. She needed to wait for her husband and work this out together. About half an hour had passed when there was the sound of the door opening. Jeremy had finally come home. Amber, I'm home, he shouted. Amber quickly walked out into the hallway. Jeremy, I'm begging you, please talk to your mom. This isn't normal. Just showing up uninvited like that. Jeremy silently went into the kitchen. Rose was sitting in the armchair, enjoying her tea. Mom, hi. I see you've settled in, haven't you? Jeremy asked with a strained smile. Hi, son. Yes, it's so cozy here. Amber couldn't stand it and told her lover. Your mom said she's going to live with us. Mom, why didn't you tell me you were coming? Son, but I told you a long time ago that I planned to renovate the apartment. You probably forgot, didn't you? No, I remember. What's renovation got to do with it? That's not what I asked you. Well, I'm renovating, and I don't have a place to live. So I came to your place. I didn't tell you because I wanted to surprise you. But it was a good surprise. Amber said snidely. Mom, you're an adult, and you should know that it's not nice to come over unannounced. Son, I'm sorry. So can I stay here for a while until the renovations are done? Jeremy thought for a moment, then said, Okay, Mom, just please let's live peacefully and quietly. The mother-in-law cast a wry glance at Amber. Then she looked at her son and said, Sure, Jeremy. Amber stood by her side, feeling superfluous, as if her opinion had not been taken into account at all. And from that day on, it was as if Amber's everyday life was divided into before and after. Every day, her mother-in-law intervened in every conversation between Jeremy and Amber, between Amber and Emily. She gave advice on how to raise a child, how to plant flowers and weed the vegetable garden, what was good to eat, what was bad for her. Every time Amber tried to delicately tell her mother-in-law not to interfere, Rose closed Amber's mouth with one of her crowning phrases, So this is my house, and I have every right to make my own rules. As time went on, the situation only grew more heated. Amber's patience wore thin, and one day she didn't hold back. In response to another reproach to her mother-in-law about cleaning the house, Amber sharply responded, I'm so sick of you and your advice. Everything is wrong with you. Her mother-in-law raised her eyebrows and calmly said, So if you're sick of everything, pack your things and get out of this house. Amber froze in place, not believing her ears. She felt a wave of indignation and resentment rising inside her. At that moment, Jeremy walked into the room. "What's going on in here? Are you two fighting again? How tired I am of this," he said, looking at his mom and his wife. "Your mom just told me to pack my things and leave the house," Amber blurted out. Rose shrugged and said calmly, "Your spouse said she was sick of everything." Amber smirked. "Not everything, but your recriminations, barbs, and useless advice." "Son, I just wanted Amber to realize that she needs to learn to respect her elders and listen to advice. I'm trying to help." Amber couldn't help but cry. "Jeremy, I can't live like this anymore. She's driving me out of the house and ruining our family. And she's always fighting," the mother-in-law blurted out. Jeremy walked over to his wife and hugged her. Then, looking at his mom, sternly said, "Mom, my wife is not a conflicted person at all. In all the years of life with her, we have never quarreled, but you're the one who likes to quarrel. I regret that I put the house in your name." "But you and I hardly fought before Amber came along," said Rose, looking at her angrily. "Mom, that's enough. I'm tired of hearing labels about others. You better find your own faults and apologize. Amber is my wife and Emily is my daughter. Don't you dare speak ill of them." Rose clearly did not expect this from her son and blushed. After a few seconds, she said, "Jeremy, you have no right to talk to me like that. I am your own mother. When I'm gone, you'll realize the value of my advice." Jeremy softened a little, and Amber thought, what a manipulator. This fight had alienated everyone. Even Jeremy and Amber's relationship cooled a bit. A few days later, the mother-in-law started making things unbearable for Amber again. Tired of the arguments and pressure, Amber decided to leave. In the evening, when Jeremy came home from work and saw the suitcases, he asked, "Are you going somewhere?" "Yes," Amber replied firmly. "I can't live in the same house with your mom. I have to think about Emily's peace of mind. You, as a psychologist, should understand that." She took a deep breath. "Jeremy, you made a mistake when you deeded the house to your mom. After that, she moved here and created unbearable conditions for me in order to survive me. And she succeeded. You know, I'm grateful for your protection. You tried to talk to her, to explain, but your overbearing mom often overpowered you and you didn't see it. I love you so much, but I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving." "Yule, what about Emily? It's stressful for her. I've grown attached to her. She's become like family to me." Amber could barely hold back the tears. "Yeah, I'm always thinking about Emily. The only way I can see right now is to leave. I want to live in love and peace, not in daily fights with your mom. It hurts to know that your mom ruined our relationship." "You're a grown woman, Amber, and I can't force you to stay," Jeremy said with longing in his eyes. With a shrug, Amber and Emily left for their studio apartment. When they got home, Amber thought, it's a good thing I listened to Jeremy and didn't sell the apartment, or I would have been homeless. She decided not to jump to conclusions and actions about her marriage. After all, if they spouses are destined to be together, they will be together, despite all the troubles of life. A month passed. During that time, Jeremy hadn't called once. On the one hand, Amber was a little glad she had time to calm down, to recover from the quarrels and stresses associated with her mother-in-law. But on the other hand, she was very worried about Jeremy and their marriage. And of course, she believed and hoped that things would work out between them. When Amber left, Jeremy, despite all his stamina and willpower, became depressed. Rose rejoiced when she learned that Amber and Emily had left home, but then became worried about her son, seeing him in a depressed state. "Son, don't be so upset. You'll meet a worthy woman who will appreciate you and won't abandon you at the slightest hardship." "Mom, enough. I don't want to talk," Jeremy answered dryly and left the room. One day he was sitting in his office, trying to get in the mood for work, but he couldn't concentrate. Thoughts floated before his eyes, images of important and significant moments in his life that made him happy and that disappeared in an instant: meeting Amber, meeting Emily, spending time together, getting married, cozy evenings and heartfelt conversations, buying his dream house, moving. Suddenly it hit Jeremy, Amber's right. Everything was perfect between us before Mom arrived. He began to remember his wife's words. Your mom is manipulating you. She took advantage of the moment and moved into the house. She's reining me in. How did I not notice that? Jeremy asked himself. Mom is the true cause of all the fighting in my family. I mean, she's really always openly said that Amber wasn't right for me because she had a kid. And I didn't pay attention to it. I thought things would work out, but they didn't. They just got worse. And then he remembered one thing. When his mom had been sick and Jeremy had brought her groceries, she'd said something he'd missed. Son, be careful with Amber. Don't forget she has a daughter. And she could take advantage of the situation and kick you out on the street if there's a misunderstanding between you two. Don't put the house in Amber's name. You should put it in my name or your name, especially since you put most of the money into the house. Jeremy sighed heavily. Wow, that's how it worked out. And the house ended up in Mom's name, the way she masterfully led me to suggest that I put the house in her name. Well, Mom's a piece of work. Without thinking, Jeremy went upstairs to the bedroom and started packing his things. Half an hour later, he went downstairs to meet his mom. Son, are you going on a business trip? She asked, noticing his suitcase. No, Jeremy answered dryly. To save my family. What do you mean? Rose frowned. Directly. Jeremy, I don't understand. So where are you going? She couldn't seem to calm down. I'm going to see my lovely wife, Amber, and my daughter, Emily. The ones you drove out of this house? Rose turned pale and pressed her lips together. Amber again. What do you see in her? What do I see in her? Mom, it's none of your business because this is my family. And from now on, I will never let you manipulate us again. You can't destroy my family. Jeremy, you don't understand. And you've been yelling so vehemently that this is your home. Yes, Mom, the house is in your name. Only from now on, you'll be living in it alone because I'm going to live with Amber. Forget her, Rose screamed. Don't even think about it. Forget you have a son. Live, enjoy your home. That's all that matters to you. It's more important than me, your son. Jeremy turned and headed for the exit. Rose stood in silence, unable to believe what had happened. 40 minutes later, Jeremy was already parking the car in front of Amber's house. He looked at her windows. The lights were on, even though he was very worried. Jeremy was determined to repair and mend his relationship with his wife. Rang the doorbell, and after a few seconds, footsteps were heard. Who's there? Jeremy heard Amber's voice. It's me, Jeremy. She looked through the peephole and opened it right away. You? She asked, surprised. Yes, Amber. I'm sorry to be here so late. We need to talk. He thought Amber wouldn't want to talk to him. But she opened the door wider, letting him know he could come in, just quietly. Emily's already asleep, Amber said. Jeremy walked into the apartment, took off his shoes, and headed for the kitchen. Amber followed him. They sat down at the table. Amber, Jeremy started right away. I've been doing a lot of thinking over the last month, and I realized that you were right. My mom has really been manipulating us. I hadn't noticed it before, or didn't want to notice. But it wasn't until you and Emily left that I realized how much my mom was meddling in our lives. I'm sorry about that. Amber lowered her eyes, and Jeremy, taking a deep breath, added, Amber, I can't change my mom, but I can change the course of events in my life. You and Emily are my family, and I can't imagine my future life without you. Amber looked at her husband, her eyes glistening with tears. Jeremy, this has been very hard on both of us. Emily asked, why doesn't Daddy love us anymore? I love you both. I never stopped loving you both. I told my mom I was leaving for you and that I wouldn't let her interfere in our lives anymore. Amber, let's you and I keep our family together and build our happiness without her interference. Amber remained silent. Jeremy walked over to her and put his arms around her. Love, I promise. I'll do everything I can to make you and Emily happy. Let's start over. Let's start over. Amber nodded, smiling through her tears. and so began a new phase of their lives. They were living together again in a one-room apartment. Talking about the house was avoided. 2 months went by. Then one day, Amber had enough and asked her husband, "Jeremy, are you not talking to your mom?" "No, Amber. After I left, I never saw her again. And I don't want to." Amber never talked about her mother-in-law. One day, Amber was teaching a workshop, and during the class, she got sick. The students in the workshop were scared, ran up, and gave Amber some water. When she got home, she felt like she didn't feel any better. "I'm sure it's all stress from the conflict with my mom," Jeremy said, and insisted on going to the doctor in the morning. The doctor examined Amber and said he didn't see any cold symptoms and gave a referral to other specialists. Over the next few days, Amber had tests and checkups. What was her surprise when a pelvic ultrasound told her she was pregnant? She returned home in pleasant shock. Jeremy met her on the doorstep and asked, "How were the results? What did the doctors say?" Amber decided to make a joke and, making a serious face, said, "Oh, what did they say?" "You have no idea. I don't even know what to make of all this." Jeremy became wary, looked intently at his wife and asked, "Amber, tell it like it is. We'll get through this." Amber stalled for time, believing, "I don't even know how to tell you." What they said left me in complete shock. A pleasant one, though. Jeremy frowned and said sternly, "Are you kidding me? Well, just say it already." Amber smiled. "I'm pregnant." Jeremy's eyes widened in surprise. "What, are you serious? That's amazing." Then he sighed and added, "Honey, you scared me with your joke." She laughed. Jeremy put his arm around her and asked, "So how are you feeling?" "The doctor said I'm fine. Just need to get more rest, watch your health, take it easy and take vitamins. Honey, I'm so glad that soon there will be an addition to our family." A few weeks passed, and Amber began to notice that Jeremy was worried about something. "Honey, I can see something's bothering you. Why don't you tell me? I thought we said we were going to talk about this." "Amber, you're in no position to tell you what's bothering you right now." "But honey, I'm your wife and I'm really worried about you." Jeremy sighed. "Amber, we're about to have one more person in our family, and the living space is small. That's what worries me. If it weren't for my mom, we could live in a house. But I don't even want to talk to her, let alone see her, honey." "Why don't I talk to her? After all, she's your own person." "No," Jeremy cut him off. "I don't want to. And let's please not talk about this anymore." Amber shrugged. "Honey, then maybe we should take out a loan and buy a 2-bedroom apartment. I've been thinking about that too. It's a pity, of course, that we spent so much money to buy a dream house and we can't live in it." "Darling, let's not talk about bad things. I'd better go to the bank tomorrow, ask about the loan and the interest." "Yes, I will," Jeremy said and hugged Amber. The next day he went to the bank and found out about the terms of the loan. That evening, sitting on the couch, he shared the results with Amber. "The interest rates are reasonable, and the bank is willing to consider our application." "That's great, but let's start gathering all the necessary documents." Jeremy nodded his head. But this whole situation with the house and his mother made him very angry and sometimes pushed him to the limit, no matter how much he hid it. A few times he'd even thought of going to his mom's house and just kicking her out. But each time, as soon as he imagined this step, he pulled himself together, forcing himself to calm down and not to do rash things. Knowing his mother's temper, Jeremy realized that doing so might make things worse. And he didn't want that. After all, Amber was expecting a child, and unnecessary excitement could hurt her. A few weeks passed, and the family successfully got approved for a loan. But Jeremy and Amber never had to take out a loan. They were in for another surprise. One evening, when Jeremy and Amber were having tea and the girl was already asleep, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Who could it be? "It's late, isn't it?" Jeremy wondered. "I'll get it," Amber said and walked out into the hallway. A couple seconds later, she called out, "Jeremy, come here." He jumped up from his chair, thinking something was wrong. But when he stepped out into the hallway, he saw his mom on the doorstep. "Hello," Rosa said. "Hello." "Hello," Jeremy and Amber said in unison. Amber stood there in shock. She hadn't heard from her mother-in-law in months, and then she showed up in person. Amber immediately thought that her mother-in-law would not miss a moment to scandalize her. But Rose smiled and said, "Amber, please forgive me for all the insults and negative actions towards you. I was wrong." Then she looked at Jeremy and added, "Son, me too. I'm sorry." Jeremy was taken aback. "Mom, this is unexpected. What made you come here and apologize?" "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened. After you all left, I suddenly realized how much pain and suffering I'd caused you all. And you're the people who are closest to me. Please forgive me if you can." Amber looked at Rosa, her eyes filled with tears. "Rosa, come inside. Why are you standing on the doorstep?" When Rosa stepped inside, Jeremy smiled and said, "Mom, thanks for coming. We all want peace and goodness." Rosa cried and then put the folder on the table and said, "Here's the paperwork for your dream house. I've reissued it to Amber. My apartment is finished being remodeled. I'm moving in tomorrow. And again, if you'll excuse me, I really want you to be happy." Amber and Jeremy were stunned. "Mom, but you're such a good person for realizing your mistakes and finding the strength to come to us. And you forgave us too. I'm sorry if we hurt you in any way," Amber said. As they sat around the table, they all realized the importance of the moment. A month later, Jeremy, Amber, and Emily moved again, this time to their dream home. Spacious rooms, cozy atmosphere, a pond and flowers around it all seemed like a real miracle. After months of uncertainty, Rosa came to visit periodically, trying her best to make things right with Amber and Emily. And 6 months later, Amber gave birth to a son. And one evening, sitting in the garden, Amber said, "Darling, I still can't believe it's worked out like this. The dream house, our kids, our mom, it's all falling into place." "Yes, Amber, I'm very happy about that too." "And I'm very happy," Jeremy replied. They sat side by side, enjoying the quiet of country life and the peace that now reigned in their lives. Rose, watching them from the window, smiled. Her heart was filled with joy and pride for her son and his family. She realized that love and forgiveness can work wonders.